Harper Audio presents The X-Files, Ruins, by Kevin J. Anderson. Read by Mitch Pileggi. Xitaclan Ruins, Yucatan, Mexico. Friday, 5:45 p.m. Even after days of hard excavation, they had barely scratched the surface of the ancient city. But Cassandra Rubicon had already seen enough to know that the ruins held unimaginable secrets about the birth of the Maya Empire. At the far western edge of the Yucatan, the lost city had been hidden by nature for more than 1,000 years. The native helpers had called the place Xitaclan, their voices tinged with awe and fear. In the late afternoon, Cassandra alone worked inside the pyramid of Xitaclan, exploring. Shining her flashlight ahead, she ran a dusty hand through perspiration-dampened cinnamon hair. The color of cinnamon bark, her father always insisted, not the faded reddish-tan powder found on grocery store spice racks. The color of her eyes hung midway between green and brown, like rich copper-bearing ore. Outside, her partners in the University of California expedition kept themselves busy with the external excavations, mapping the overall layout of the city, with its ceremonial plaza, temples, and monolithic limestone obelisks, stelae, carved with fearsome images of mythical feathered serpents. They had found a vine-overgrown ball court arena, where the ancient Maya had played their bloody sport, in which the losers, or winners, depending on some historical interpretations, were sacrificed to the gods. An archaeological treasure trove, Xitaclan provided far too many ruins even for a large, well-financed crew to explore in anything less than a year. But Cassandra and her 4 young companions would do their best for as long as their meager university funding held out. Numerous moss-covered stelae towered at strategic astronomical points throughout the jungle, while others had toppled. All of them, though, contained rich and exciting glyphs. The showpiece of Xitaclan, though, was the magnificent stair-stepped pyramid of Xitaclan that loomed over the center of the city. Though overgrown with weeds and underbrush, it was still beautifully preserved. The natives' paralyzing superstitions had protected it from prying eyes, until now. Topping the pyramid's highest platform stood the many-pillared Temple of the Feathered Serpent, with its amazing carvings and ornate friezes depicting calendars, myths, history. Cassandra had named the temple herself after noting the dense motifs that showed the wise god Xitaclan and his feathered reptilian companions, or guardians, a common symbol of power in the Maya mythos. The intricate bas-reliefs added a new richness to the Quetzalcoatl Xitaclan legends of the early Central American peoples. Her team had also found an unfathomably deep cistern behind the pyramid, a natural limestone sinkhole filled with oily black water in whose murky depths Cassandra suspected hid many artifacts, relics, and quite probably the bones of sacrificial victims. Her team planned to break out the diving equipment within a week, and she herself would descend into the depths. But for now, they still had too much initial cataloging to complete. More breathtaking discoveries, more work, but too little time and too little money. For now, she concentrated on exploring inside the pyramid. The crews of native workers recruited by her team's local guide, Fernando Victorio Aguilar, a self-styled adventurer and expediter, had worked for days already, hacking and chopping at the underbrush to remove the shroud of time and nature from around Xitaclan. As soon as they saw the carvings of feathered serpents, though, the native workers had retreated in terror, even when she offered to increase their meager payment. Finally, they fled, and then Aguilar ran off, abandoning her team in the deep jungle. In her work, Cassandra had always respected native traditions and beliefs. It came with the territory. But her excitement at these discoveries had grown so intense that she found such superstitions frustrating, and her impatience flared up. The archaeologists continued working on their own. They had supplies for a few weeks and a transmitter to call for help should they need it. For now, she and the 4 others enjoyed their solitude. Today, Kelly Rowan, the team's second archaeologist, and, as of recently, the man with whom she shared her tent, was spending the last hours of daylight on the outside steps of the pyramid studying the Maya hieroglyphics. Christopher Porte bent beside him with his battered sketchpad, excitedly trying to translate the chiseled glyphs as Kelly used brushes and fine tools to remove debris from the designs. Kate Barron, the team's historian and photographer, took advantage of the late afternoon light to work on one of her watercolors. Kate took rolls of archival photos rapidly and efficiently, but once finished, she preferred using her paints to recreate the spirit of the place. Deep inside the pyramid of Xitaclan, Cassandra continued her explorations through the tunnels, taking only brief breaks to check on Kelly and Christopher, who worked at deciphering the hieroglyphic staircase, and John Forbin, the grad student architect and engineer who was studying the other half-fallen structures. John's wanderings took him farther into the jungle as he marked the locations of ruins on the wrinkled topographical map he kept with him at all times. Cassandra glanced at her compass watch and pushed deeper inside the labyrinth, aiming her high-powered flashlight ahead of her like a weapon. So far, most tunnels she'd explored had turned into blind alleys that might have been designed to confuse trespassers, or they could have been sealed treasure chambers. Even more exciting, from an archaeologist's point of view, the dead ends could be sealed off burial crypts or storage vaults for collected volumes of ancient writings. Suddenly, in the flashlight beam ahead of her, she saw that the inner walls to her left were of a markedly different color. With a flush of excitement, Cassandra realized she had stumbled upon the inner temple. This must be the original structure on whose foundation the pyramid of Xitaclan had been erected. The ancient Maya had often built taller, more impressive temples atop old ruins because of their belief that certain places concentrated magic as time went by. The glorious ceremonial center of Xitaclan had been the nexus for rituals in this locality. What had long ago begun as an isolated religious center in the thickest jungle had eventually become a magnet for Maya power, until the people had abruptly and mysteriously abandoned it, leaving it preserved and empty for her to uncover centuries later. From all the evidence she had uncovered, Xitaclan's glory was no mere stepping stone in Maya culture. Tales of the legendary city were so deeply implanted in the psyche of the native people that the locals still talked about the curse and the spirits that clung to the place. Many people had supposedly disappeared in the area, but Cassandra put that down to local mythology. What had caused the ancient Maya to place their hub of religious significance here, in an uninteresting portion of the jungle with no roads or rivers, no copper or gold mines nearby? Why here? Rubble had fallen across the passage ahead, blocking her way. But Cassandra felt her adrenaline pumping. Now that she had reached the center of the pyramid, she needed to see what lay beyond. It was possible that she stood on the brink of a great discovery, but not unless she could go all the way. Cassandra managed to make an opening just wide enough to wriggle her slender body through. She clambered up to the opening and thrust the flashlight forward. Then, bumping her head as she strained forward to see, she crawled part way into a new corridor that sloped steeply down. Cassandra's white light reflected off walls made of peeling metallic plates, bent girders, crystalline panels. When she moved the flashlight beam away, portions of the newly exposed interior continued to glow with an eerie, pale afterlight. From her knowledge of ancient history and culture, these bizarre fixtures seemed impossible to her. The Maya had never known to use any kind of metal extensively, satisfied with obsidian and flint for their needs. But here, unmistakably, she saw smooth, untarnished metal as if made in modern smelters. It was an unusual alloy, certainly not the crude gold and bronze that the ancient Maya had used. She desperately wanted to climb all the way inside, to explore to her heart's content, but common sense warned her not to. Cassandra swallowed hard. After crawling back out, she began to retrace her steps, winding through the labyrinth to reach the exit, forcing herself to be calm. She thought of her wiry old father and imagined how proud he would be to see his daughter making discoveries that rivaled, even overshadowed, those at the high point of his own career. As she approached the low exit to the pyramid, bright rays from the setting sun shone in her eyes like the light of an oncoming train. She rushed forward and stumbled out of the pyramid into the open air. "Hey, Kelly!" she shouted. "I found something! You have to get the team, quick! Wait till you see this!" Shading her eyes, she peered out into the open plaza where Kate had earlier erected an easel for her watercolor work. Now the easel lay smashed on the ground. Uneasy now, she again scanned the steep staircase that ran up outside the ziggurat. There, Christopher and Kelly had painstakingly cleaned the chiseled glyphs and sketched them on pads, translating the chronicle of Xitaclan's mythic history as they went. She heard movement to the side, footsteps coming around the pyramid from the direction of the deep sacrificial cenote. She heaved a sigh of relief. Here were her friends after all. But then the shadowy silhouettes of strange men appeared, obviously not any members of her team. In the dim light she could barely discern their features, but she did see without a doubt that they carried guns, rifles. The men pointed their weapons at her. "You will come with us, señorita." "Who are you?" Cassandra gripped her flashlight as if it were a club. "Where's my team? We're American citizens. How dare you?" One of the other men jerked up his rifle and fired. The bullet ricocheted off one of the pyramid's stone blocks barely 6 inches from her face. A spray of needle-sharp stone fragments peppered her cheek. With a sharp cry, she ducked backward into the temple, seeking refuge in the ancient darkness. She ran down the long tunnel, hearing loud shouts in Spanish outside. She didn't dare think of what they might have already done to Kate, John, Christopher, and Kelly. She would think about that later, if she survived. More rifle shots rang out behind her. Bullets bounced along the pyramid walls, whining a high-pitched song of death. Cassandra had the advantage, for now. She had been down here before. She had a flashlight, and she had a vague idea of where she was going, back toward the center of the pyramid. But she had no place to go from there. Going deeper inside would only drive her more firmly into the trap. She had to think, use her wits to outsmart these men, whoever they were. The corridors of the outer pyramid wound downward on a slope, littered with fallen limestone blocks and rough debris. She stumbled, scraped her hands against the rough walls, but kept moving. Finally, Cassandra found the smooth, vitrified walls of the inner temple and knew she had nearly reached her destination, though what she intended to do there was another question altogether. Casting her flashlight beam ahead, she discovered the small opening she had recently excavated. It looked like an open wound. No, it was an escape hatch. She found her way over the rubble barricade into the isolated chamber and dropped down. Her feet echoed on the floor, a floor that was inexplicably metallic. The passageways became oppressively silent again. She rushed ahead to the final descending passage, the spiral ramp at the exact core of the pyramid. The steep tunnel looked as if it burrowed well beneath ground level. She hurried down it, moving farther and farther away from her pursuers. A faint wave of hope splashed across her mind. She wondered if this ramp might lead to some unknown exit from the pyramid, perhaps far down the wall of the limestone sinkhole. Maybe she could get out of this after all. The sharp crack of a gunshot drove a spike of sound through the echoing rooms. Cassandra swallowed hard, feeling claustrophobic, lost. She staggered through a small opening, hoping to find some source of light. A brilliant glare washed around her, and in an instant, Cassandra saw that she had crossed into a dead-end room the size of a closet, or a coffin. Blazing illumination flooded from behind smooth, glassy walls. Too late, Cassandra wondered if this fate might not be worse than the men with guns. Icy, cold light cascaded over her, freezing hard, and all of her thoughts ceased. FBI Headquarters, Washington, D.C. Tuesday, 9:14 a.m. Special Agent Dana Scully remembered the first time she had come to Mulder's private sanctum in the bowels of FBI Headquarters, a fresh young field agent inexplicably assigned to the X-Files. At the time, Agent Mulder had considered her a spy for Bureau higher-ups who did not condone his passionate interest in unexplained phenomena. Now, after 3 years of working together, Scully and Mulder had investigated dozens of cases and relied on each other's help more times than they could count. Mulder's belief in the supernatural and extraterrestrials remained unshaken, while Scully remained just as steadfast in her search for rational explanations. Though they frequently did not agree on their conclusions, they performed extraordinarily well as a team. Scully visited her partner's narrow office often enough that the clutter of Mulder's dreary office was etched permanently in her mind. This morning the room did not disappoint her. Debris from his unusual research lay strewn about the office. Videotapes, DNA records, medical histories, close-up photos of smallpox scars on withered skin, blurry snapshots that supposedly showed evidence of flying saucers. A hunk of twisted shrapnel, purportedly from a crashed spacecraft found in Wisconsin, rested on one shelf. A dozen unsolved mysteries in open folders waited to be put to rest in the nondescript black file cabinets that contained Mulder's raison d'etre, the X-Files. She knocked on the frame of the open door and stepped inside, brushing a hand through her red-gold hair. "I'm not sure I have the energy to face this chaos so early in the morning, Mulder," she said. Looking down, she noticed that he had piled his desk with archaeology texts, books on ancient mythology, and detailed maps of Central America. She tried to put all the ingredients together in a flash, because she would have to prepare herself for what her partner would propose for their next investigation. "Take a look at this, Scully," he said, and held out an object about the size of his fist, intricately carved and polished, made of a buttery whitish-green stone. 3 guesses. She took the heavy relic and held it in her hands. The stone's surface was polished so smooth it felt as if it had been oiled. The carving showed a sinuous serpentine form, some kind of viper bristling with large, incongruous feathers. Curved, needle-like fangs protruded from its mouth, giving the creature a ferocious appearance. "I give up." She scrutinized the artifact again, but it remained a mystery. A Christmas tree ornament? Not even close. "Okay," she said, taking the question seriously now. "I think I recognize the stone. It's jade, isn't it?" "Very good, Scully. I didn't know they taught mineralogy in medical school." "I didn't know they included mineralogy and behavioral psychology courses either," she countered, then turned her attention back to the object. "It looks very old. Some sort of mythological figure, maybe? From the books on your desk, I would guess its origin to be Aztec?" "Maya, actually," he said. "Best estimates date this piece of work to be about 1,500 years old. The Maya people revered jade. It was a sacred stone to them, used for only the most precious of objects." "Okay, Mulder. So this wasn't a simple figure whittled out of wood for amusement. Somebody really wanted to make this particular object. In that case, I take it there's some significance to the special design. A serpent with feathers. Did the Mayans revere snakes?" "Ah," he said, "not exactly. You'll notice that's no ordinary snake. It's a famous mythological figure associated with the god Quetzalcoatl. That's what the Aztec called him. The Maya used the name Xitaclan, a god of great wisdom. Some sources say Xitaclan taught the Maya about calendars and astronomy." He offered her a sunflower seed. She shook her head, so he popped it into his own mouth. The Maya astronomer priests were so precise in their calculations that the accuracy of their primitive calendars wasn't surpassed until this very century. They even built interlocking gear machines to make their calendar computations based on overlapping cycles out to 52 years. Xitaclan must have been an exceptional teacher. Or he knew something the rest of the people didn't. Their mathematical abilities were extraordinary, too. In fact, they were the only ancient civilization ever to invent the concept of zero. That's important for balancing your checkbook, of course. "That's all very interesting, Mulder," she said, "but what does a 1,500-year-old lump of jade in the shape of a feathered serpent have to do with the case?" "Under normal circumstances, it wouldn't have anything to do with one of our cases," he said. "But this particular relic was recently confiscated at the border of the Mexican state of Quintana Roo down in the Yucatan. The arrested dealer claims that this artifact came from the archaeological dig of a rediscovered Maya city deep in the jungles, a ruin called Xitaclan. According to official Mexican reports, there have been numerous unexplained disappearances in the area dating back decades. And because the area is so primitive and isolated, you can bet plenty more of them have gone entirely undocumented." "I'm still not sure I see the connection here, Mulder." She waited, casually crossing one leg over the other. "Locals won't go near the place, claiming it's cursed or sacred, depending on which translation you use. Their legends tell of vicious feathered serpents and the god Xitaclan and the lost ghosts of sacrificial victims whose blood stained the temple stones." Scully shifted on the old government-issued chair. "I doubt that the Bureau would consider sending us to investigate an ancient Maya curse. There's more to it than that." His eyes grew bright. A team of American archaeologists had just begun excavating Xitaclan under the auspices of the University of California, San Diego. According to early reports, this one site is untouched and the key to many mysteries of Maya history. It could be the first large-scale construction their civilization attempted, definitely the site of frequent sacrifices. He smiled as if delivering a coup de grace. Also, my preliminary chemical analysis of this object turned up some interesting anomalies, an odd crystalline structure, unidentifiable impurities that imply that this material did not come from the Yucatan near the ruins. You think this thing comes from outer space? He shrugged and brushed a pile of sunflower shells into the garbage. The archaeology team disappeared without a trace a week ago. No signal of distress, no sign of trouble. You and I get to go find them. But Mulder, wouldn't this normally be handled by the Mexican authorities? Mulder said, I also received a call yesterday from the father of Cassandra Rubicon, the woman who led the UC San Diego team. It seems her father is an extremely well-known archaeologist himself. He's contacted the FBI field office for San Diego. They heard the words ancient curse and Maya ruins and passed the case on to me. Scully met his gaze, and he raised his eyebrows. Vladimir Rubicon is coming with us. Scully glanced at the jade sculpture, at the mythology books, and then at the fascinated expression on Mulder's face. I don't suppose it'll do me any good to try to talk you out of this, she said. It won't do you any good at all, he said. In that case, I suppose I always wanted to go to Mexico, she answered. Private Villa of Xavier Salida, Quintana Roo, Mexico. Tuesday, 5:01 p.m. The old Mexican police cruiser with official state markings rolled along the tree-lined driveway, working its way uphill. The walled fortress of one of Quintana Roo's most powerful drug lords stood like a citadel in the dense forests. In the front passenger seat reclined Fernando Victoria Aguilar, feigning a calm and ease that he had learned always helped him to do better business. He rubbed his fingers along his slick cheeks. He had shaved only an hour before, and he loved the delicious, glassy, smooth feel of his skin. The sharp but pleasant scent of his cologne filled the car, masking other less pleasant aromas that Carlos Pareo, the chief of Quintana Roo's state police, had collected during his daily work. Aguilar stared out the windshield, gazing appreciatively at the thick wall that surrounded Xavier Salida's huge fortress. Some of the carved panels were genuine, uprooted from forgotten and overgrown ruins out in the jungle. Others were clever forgeries Aguilar had commissioned. Xavier Salida never knew the difference. The drug lord was a self-deluded, if powerful, fool. Aguilar touched the precious object packed in its crate. This is a complex deal, so let me do the talking. Since this object is rare and unusual, we have no way of determining its true value. Just get the most you can, Pareo growled. Weapons cost money, and Liberacion Quintana Roo needs them. Yes, your precious revolutionaries. Aguilar adjusted his spotted hat, making certain that his long dark hair was still in its neat ponytail that hung beneath the ocelot skin. It had taken a great deal of effort to smuggle Xitaclan artifacts from under the watchful eyes of the American archaeology team, but now that had all been taken care of. The foreigners would cause no further problems. This particular artifact was one of the last large relics taken from the pyramid, a chamber of wonders, the Indian had called it in an odd voice, just before he had disappeared back into the jungles, never revealing where he had discovered the treasures. But now they had the run of Xitaclan again and plenty of freedom to explore and exploit. For all of them who had risked so much, the time had come to reap the rewards. Their footsteps echoed with a hollow sound. They could already hear Salida shouting as they approached down the second-floor hallway. The guard looked wryly at the two visitors. Senor Salida is not having a good day. One of our small cargo planes was shot down near here. We lost the pilot as well as many, many kilograms of product. I had nothing to do with this, Perito said, suddenly defensive. DEA? Senor Salida has his own suspects. They approached the largest drawing room, where two ornately carved mahogany doors stood mostly closed, leaving a gap of only a few inches between them. The drug lord's loud shouts carried through, only slightly muffled. "Grobe! It must be Peter Grobe! No one else would have the audacity!" Salida paused for a moment as if listening. "We must take out twice as many in retaliation. But make no comment, no threats, just do it." He slammed the phone down with an echoing clang. A moment later, the guard gestured for them to enter. Aguilar and Carlos Badeo entered side by side, but Aguilar knew that he had the upper hand. Aguilar carried the crate containing the precious and exotic artifact. "We are pleased you would see us, Excellency," Aguilar said. "We have another fine artifact to show you, something so marvelous you have never seen anything like it." Salida chuckled. "Fernando Victorio Aguilar, you say that to me every time you bring something to my home." Aguilar smiled. "And aren't I usually correct? Don't you usually buy what I offer you, eh?" He set the crate down on a glass table near the drug lord's desk. Salida gestured to the crate. "Well, go on, Fernando. Open it. Let me see what you have found this time." Aguilar carefully withdrew the magical artifact. The drug lord caught his breath and stepped forward, compelled and fascinated. This was exactly the reaction Aguilar had hoped for. The artifact was a completely transparent rectangular box, a little more than a foot on each side. It gleamed with prismatic colors in the light, as if the workings inside were really sheets of thin diamond plating. The components within were strange and exotic. Interlocked components, connections made of glass fibers, glinting crystals. Aguilar thought it looked like the world's most complicated clock, made entirely of lead crystal. Tiny holes had been drilled in the side of the clear case. Other movable squares marked the corners and part of the top. Etched symbols, not unlike some of the incomprehensible Maya glyphs, marked portions of the clear glass faces. None of it made sense at all. "What is it?" Salida said, touching its side and withdrawing his fingers quickly as if burned. "It's cold. Even in this heat it's cold." "This object is a great mystery, Excellency," Aguilar said. "I have never seen such an artifact before, even with all my archaeological expertise." In fact, Aguilar had very little archaeological expertise, though it was true enough that he had never encountered such an item before. Xitaclan was home to many unusual things. The drug lord leaned toward the strange object, his mouth partly open. Where did it come from? He was entranced, and Aguilar knew the deal was assured, a high-priced deal. "This artifact came from a secret new dig called Xitaclan, a pristine site. We are in the process of removing many of the most valuable pieces now. Before long, though, I am certain a new archaeological team will arrive to remove more of the objects." Carlos Barrios' face became stormy. "They want to steal them from Quintana Roo," he said, "and take them from the land where they belong." Aguilar hoped the police chief wouldn't get distracted and plunge into one of his interminable political lectures. When Xavier Salida offered to buy the relic, his opening price was already far more than Aguilar had hoped to get. Carlos Barrio could barely restrain himself, but Aguilar still managed to increase the offer by another 15%. Miami International Airport, Florida, Thursday, 1:49 p.m. Vladimir Rubicon made a fuss, insisting that it would be no trouble to take the center seat between Mulder and Scully. His form was lanky, but he seemed good at folding it up to fit into tight places. Probably, Mulder thought, because of an early career filled with squeezing through tight openings or sleeping in cramped tents while he worked in the field as an archaeologist. "It's been a long time since I've worked down in Central America, but Maya work is one of the cornerstones of my career," he said. "Perhaps some of my old contacts will be able to help us get out to Xitaclan. It's not on any map, you know. My little girl Cassandra accompanied me on some of my later digs. Her mother left us when she was 10, didn't want to deal with a crazy man who spent his time digging in the dirt in uncivilized portions of the world, playing with bones and reassembling broken pots. But Cassandra was just as fascinated as I was. I suppose that's what sparked her desire to follow in my footsteps." Rubicon swallowed and removed his half-glasses.
I never could tell whether Cassandra was doing it for the love of the work itself or if she was trying to impress me and make me proud of her, or if she just wanted to compete with her old man. I hope I get the chance to find out.
He cleared his throat, turning to get Mulder's attention.
Agent Mulder, he said,
his words difficult to decipher above the roaring background noise of coach class.
You seem to carry a deep sadness yourself, a lost loved one. You still wear the pain like an albatross around your neck.
The rhyme of the ancient FBI agent, Mulder said. But the humor didn't work, and he looked seriously into Vladimir Rubicon's cornflower blue eyes. Yes, I lost someone. He didn't elaborate. Rubicon placed a hand on Mulder's arm. To his credit, the archaeologist didn't probe any further. Mulder was reluctant to describe his memories about the bright light, the alien abduction, how his sister had floated up in the air, drifting out the window as he glimpsed the spindly, otherworldly silhouette that beckoned from the glowing doorway. Mulder had buried those thoughts himself for a long time, and had only reconstructed them through intense sessions of regressive hypnosis. Scully suspected that Mulder's memory of the event might be unreliable, that the hypnosis sessions had only reinforced images he himself wanted to believe. But Mulder had to trust his memory. He had nothing else to go by, except for his faith that Samantha must be alive and that he would find her again someday.
It's the not knowing that's the worst, Rubicon said, interrupting his thoughts. Waiting and waiting, hearing nothing.
Finally, the plane began its gradual descent, and Mulder could see the distant coastline of the Yucatan Peninsula, a curve that sliced across the azure waters of the Caribbean. We'll do everything in our power to find your daughter, Dr. Rubicon. We'll find the truth. Cancun, Mexico, Thursday, 4:21 p.m. Their stucco-faced hotel boasted modern construction with a pseudo-Aztec design. The curling waves were as jewel-toned blue and the sand as powdery white as the brochures promised. While Mulder and Scully waited in line to check in, Rubicon murmured to himself, anxious to make the phone calls and track down potential guides for their expedition deep into the jungles. He did not want to waste a moment in finding his daughter. After showering and changing, they met in one of the hotel restaurants for dinner. The maitre d' showed Mulder and Scully to a table with a centerpiece of tropical flowers. Scully set her menu down. I called the consulate to check in. The Bureau has filed all the appropriate clearances and notified local law enforcement, but apparently they weren't too helpful, so the next step is up to us. As soon as we figure out what the next step is, Mulder said. I think we can rent a car and drive toward the area where the team disappeared. Maybe we can find a guide to take us through the jungles. Before Rubicon even arrived, the waiter came by to take their order. Then Scully opened her briefcase and drew out a folder. I have been going over the background information we have on the members of the archaeological expedition, she said, the other missing American citizens. You never know where we might find a lead. She spread the folder and took out several dossiers on the UC San Diego grad students, along with photographs. She handed Mulder the photographs, and he glanced at each one in turn. Then, checking at his watch again, Mulder scanned the room just in time to see Rubicon at the entrance to the dining room. Mulder held up a hand to catch his attention, and the old archaeologist came over, walking as if already exhausted. The waiter hovered beside Rubicon as he took the empty seat at the table. He pushed the menu aside.
In the last postcard I received from Cassandra, she mentioned a local named Fernando Victoria Aguilar. I have tracked down someone with that name and left a message that we are interested in being guided into the jungles. I hope we can connect with them either tonight or tomorrow.
He slouched down in his chair.
Sitting around some glitzy tourist resort makes me feel so helpless, so guilty, not knowing what my Cassandra could be going through at this very moment.
Mulder's and Scully's meals came, breaking the mood. Rubicon quickly chose a selection of his own from the menu and sent the waiter off. Looking at the forlorn expression on the old man's face, Mulder remembered the days after Samantha had disappeared. Though he had teased her mercilessly, as any brother teases a sister, he had longed for her,
desperately trying to think of what he could do to help, how he could find her. If only he had been able to stop the abduction somehow. If only he had faced the bright light. He remembered riding his bike around the hometown neighborhood of Chilmark, Massachusetts, population 650, ringing doorbells, asking everyone if they had seen Samantha. He knew deep in his heart, though, that no simple explanation could possibly account for what he had seen. For years now, Mulder had seen an echo of Samantha in every little dark-haired girl. Now he watched Vladimir Rubicon going through a similar process, coming to the Yucatan, insisting on accompanying the FBI agents on their investigation. "We'll find her," Mulder said, reaching across the table, forcing confidence into his voice. In the back of his mind, he again saw an image of his sister being dragged off into the light. "We'll find her." But Mulder wasn't sure to whom exactly he was making his promise. Cancun, Thursday, 9:11 p.m. Scully flopped back onto the bed without turning down the sheets, hoping that the moment of peace would last for more than 2 minutes. The pounding on her door was sharp and strident, like cannon blasts from a warring Spanish galleon. "All right, coming," Scully called out. She picked up her weapon. Upon opening the door, she found a man in a police chief's uniform, his hairy-knuckled fist raised to continue the insistent knocking. "You're FBI agent Scully, and the other one's Mulder?" "Excuse me," Scully said, making sure he saw her 9mm pistol. "Who are you, sir?" He waited for her to invite him into her room, ignoring the weapon. "I'm Chief Carlos Barrio of the Quintana Roo Police Force. I am sorry I could not meet you at the airport. Please pardon my rudeness. I have many cases, but few men." "We were told you had been contacted," Scully said, "but that you offered no help in our investigation." The connecting door opened, and Mulder stepped into her room, his hair tousled, his shirt untucked and hastily buttoned. Seeing the burly policeman, Mulder said, "We sure must have upset that hotel desk clerk by not going on one of his disco cruises." "With your heavy caseload, we're glad to focus our efforts on this investigation," Scully said. Despite his outwardly polite manner, she sensed an antagonism buried deep within him. "We've obtained all the proper clearances and authorizations. We have a long-standing tradition of cooperation with local law enforcement agencies, Mr. Barrio. We both have the same goal, after all, to find our missing people." Barrio, his eyes still cold, said, "Of course I will cooperate." "Thank you, Mr. Barrio," Scully said. "Please be assured that we are not trying to infringe upon your jurisdiction. The state of Quintana Roo is the area in which the crime was committed." "Alleged crime," Barrio interrupted, letting his composure slip. "Allegedly committed, to use your legal terms. We have no confirmation as to what actually happened." "Allegedly committed," Scully conceded. Mulder cleared his throat. "We do have the right to investigate crimes perpetrated upon American citizens. Until we know additional information about Cassandra Rubicon and her companions, we must operate under the assumption that someone may intend to hold them as potential hostages." "Hostages?" Barrio smiled. "I'm sorry, Agent Mulder, but I think it's more likely they just got lost out in the jungle." "I hope that proves to be the case," Scully said, keeping herself between Mulder and the burly police officer. 2 men hurried down the hall. Vladimir Rubicon hustled along, leading another man who was deeply tanned and wiry, with long hair bundled in a ponytail under a floppy, wide-brimmed hat made from the skin of a spotted cat. Barrio looked at the 2 men, his eyes blinking in recognition as he saw the man with the floppy spotted hat. "Senor Aguilar," Barrio said, "are these people part of an expedition you are mounting?" Yes, indeed," the other man, Aguilar said. "I have just entered into arrangements with this gentleman here. Dr. Rubicon is a most eminent archaeologist. Carlos, you should be impressed to have a man of his stature come to Quintana Roo. Perhaps you will be pleased to receive positive international publicity instead of those unpleasant stories about revolutionary activities and illicit arms sales, eh?" Barrio bristled, his skin darkening. Scully looked over at Dr. Rubicon, who was flushed with excitement. "Allow me to introduce Fernando Victoria Aguilar. He's the person I was, trying to contact," said Rubicon. My daughter was indeed in touch with him, and he helped put together her party originally, though he hasn't seen her since she departed. He can take us out there."
Scully turned with forced pleasantness to the police chief. "I believe Mr. Barrio here was about to offer us the maps and notes from the ongoing investigation, everything he has compiled so far about the missing team members." She raised her eyebrows. "Isn't that correct, Chief Barrio?" The ruddy-faced man frowned as if he had just remembered an important detail.
"If you are about to mount an expedition, have you paid your appropriate stay fees?"
"I was just about to take care of all that," Fernando Aguilar interrupted.
"Carlos, you know you can trust me."
The man looked from Scully to Mulder, back to Vladimir Rubicon.
"In order to make certain portions of our expedition move more smoothly through political channels, we require clearances and taxes and fees. $1,000 should allow us the complete freedom for our expedition to depart as early as tomorrow morning, eh?"
"Tomorrow? That's wonderful," Rubicon said.
$1,000, Mulder said.
He looked over at her.
"Is your per diem higher than mine, Scully?"
"The Federal Bureau of Investigation does not engage in bribery," Scully said, her voice firm. Rubicon seemed exasperated and impatient.
"Nonsense," he said to Scully. "You don't understand how things are done."
He untucked his shirt and withdrew his own money belt. Yanking out a wad of $100 bills, he counted out 10 and stuffed them into Aguilar's outstretched palm. Aguilar pocketed 2 of the $100 bills and extended the remaining 8 to Barrio, who snatched them quickly, scowling at Mulder and Scully.
"That'll be enough for the standard government fees," he said. "I'll contact the office and see if it is possible to copy our case files for you by morning. Check at the hotel desk. I make no promises."
The police chief turned and marched off down the hall. Fernando Aguilar extended a hand.
"I'm very pleased to meet you, Señorita Scully."
He nodded to Mulder.
"We'll be seeing much more of each other in the coming days."
Private Villa of Xavier Salida, Quintana Roo, Thursday, 10:17 p.m. Xavier Salida stood on his terrace, gazing out beyond where the lights shone. He saw the monolithic silhouette of the ancient Maya stela in the middle of his courtyard. In the starlight, he could make out the lumpy form of that damned male peacock perched on top. A foolish peacock. Much like his rival, Pietro Grobe, a showy, blustering man who was ultimately insignificant. Salida had attempted to get even with the Belgian expatriate and demanded that his men eliminate one of Grobe's planes in retaliation, but that had not proved possible. Salida had had no choice but to see that a large truck filled with fuel oil had accidentally exploded in the middle of one of Grobe's marijuana fields. The resulting fire and caustic smoke had damaged a great portion of the crop. With the score evened again, Salida had no desire to escalate events into a full-scale war. He went over to his new prize, the amazing crystalline artifact Fernando Victoria Aguilar had brought to him from the ruins of Xitaclan. He already knew he must place this item in a protective glass case, displaying it but never allowing other visitors or any of the servants to touch it. It must be valuable. He stared at the strange Maya box with a childlike sense of wonder. He touched one of the sliding squares, and it moved as if gliding on a pool of oil. The relic hummed. Startled, Salida drew away, felt the deep cold tingling on his fingertips. But then he bent over again, pressing his hands, feeling the faint vibrations within the artifact. The inner tremors seemed to be gaining strength, building in power. Salida laughed in amazement. In the back of his head, somewhere beyond the range of his hearing, he sensed a high-pitched sound, a throbbing noise that eluded him as he tried to concentrate on it. Outside, his prize Doberman set up a howl in unison. The peacocks in the courtyard squawked and shrieked. Salida hurried over to the balcony but saw nothing. "Silencio!" he hollered and then turned back to the drawing room, astonished to see that the crystalline ancient box now glowed with a silvery light. As he bent over the shimmering box, the humming turned into a clear vibration. The diamond-like walls throbbed and pulsed. The bone-chilling cold had vanished from the oily surface, which now radiated a prickling warmth. Salida pressed some of the glyphs, trying to stop the frenzied activity, but instead he saw the tiny jewel-like components inside the glass case whir to life. At the core of the gadget, light began to grow, cold yet searingly bright, as if a pool of mercury had flared into incandescence. Salida stepped back, now frightened and anxious. What had Aguilar given him? What had he done? How could he stop it? The light within the crystalline object became blinding, reaching an unimaginable peak. Then the light reached its critical point and leaped to another level. Its intensity increased 1,000-fold. The heat and energy washed over Salida so rapidly he never had time to register the immense explosion, or even a second of pain. Cancun, Friday, 8:05 a.m. Waiting just inside the lobby next to other tourists ready to go on day trips, Mulder grabbed his duffel and turned to Scully. "I'll bet that's our ride." She set down her styrofoam cup of coffee next to a sand-filled ashtray and picked up her own bag. "I was afraid of that." Vladimir Rubicon followed with his backpack and his own duffel, flushed and eager. "I'm sure everyone else enjoys their vacation here in Cancun, but to me this just isn't the Yucatan. Might as well be Honolulu." Inside the Jeep, Aguilar flashed his white teeth in a grin. "Buenos dias, amigos." Two dark-haired, brown-skinned young men rode in the vehicle with Aguilar, ready to help. Rubicon took the strangers in stride and crowded into the back seat. Mulder slid in beside him. "It will take many hours to get to where we must leave the roads and brave the jungle," Aguilar said. "And who, are our new companions?" Mulder asked, gesturing to the other two squashed with him and Rubicon in the back of the Jeep. "Helpers," Aguilar said. "One will drive the Jeep back while the other will accompany us into the jungle. He's worked with me before on such expeditions." "Only one helper," Rubicon said. Aguilar gave a nonchalant wave. "I already have guides and workers waiting for us at the rendezvous point with supplies, senor. No need to shuttle them all down to the end of the Yucatan." At first they followed the coast, heading southwest on Mexico 307, then continuing inland. Scully unfolded a tattered, grease-stained road map she found jammed between the dashboard and windshield. With a sinking heart, she saw that no roads, not even dirt tracks, marked the area where they were headed. She hoped it was a misprint, or an old map. "How much farther?" Scully asked Aguilar in the middle of the afternoon. She eyed the thickening gray clouds. He peered intently, looking alongside the road, but remained silent for a long time. "Right here," he finally said. Aguilar pulled off onto the powdery white shoulder where a little mud track emerged from the thick jungle. "Let us be off, amigos," Aguilar said. "Onward to adventure." Together the group plunged into the jungle. Before long, Scully was hot and sweaty and miserable. It had been late afternoon before they even started on the path, which allowed them no more than 4 hours of hiking before they would have to stop and set up camp. Vladimir Rubicon trooped along without complaining. "We've only traveled 2 hours off the road," he said. "And look where we are. See how easily there could be immense ruins yet undiscovered in the Yucatan? Once the people abandoned them, the jungle rapidly covered them up, and they live only in, local legends." "But Xitaclan was special," Mulder asked. "More than just another set of ruins?" Rubicon drew a deep breath and paused to lean against a mahogany tree. "My Cassandra thought so. It existed for a long time, from pre-Golden Age through the Toltec influence and later human sacrifices." Through her own misery and weariness and sticky perspiration, Scully looked in the archaeologist's intense blue eyes. To her surprise, she saw that the old man did not look at all uncomfortable in the jungle. Doing field work, he seemed in his element, on his way to rescue his daughter and also to explore uncatalogued Maya ruins. When the shadows grew long in the jungle, Aguilar's local workers set up the tents where Mulder, Scully, Rubicon, and Aguilar would spend the night. Rubicon pressed Aguilar for more information about when he had accompanied Cassandra and her team out to the ruins 2 weeks earlier. "Yes," the guide said.
I brought them out here, but because they intended to stay for many weeks doing their excavating, I left and went back to Cancun. I am a civilized man, eh? I have work to do." "But she was fine when you left her?" Rubicon asked again.
"Ah, yes," Aguilar said, his eyes shining.
"More than fine. She took great pleasure in encountering the ruins. She seemed very excited." "I look forward to seeing them myself," Rubicon said.
"Day after tomorrow," Aguilar answered, nodding enthusiastically. The Pentagon, Arlington, Virginia, Saturday, 1:03 p.m. Striding down the corridor of the east wing of the Pentagon, Major Willis Jakes fell into his typical routine of spotting landmarks. Now, though, instead of wearing a camouflage outfit or a survival suit bristling with small weapons and resources, Major Jakes sported his full military dress uniform. The fact that he had been called here on a Saturday for a high-level briefing meant that an important mission must be in the works. He rapped precisely 3 times on the wire-reinforced glass window. The door opened from inside, and a man in a dark suit stood back in the shadows. Jakes stepped into the dim room.
"Major Willis Jakes," he said.
A man in a charcoal gray suit with wire-rimmed glasses and a jowly face said, "Welcome, Major Jakes, right on time." Another man with a maroon tie said, "We have some Danishes if you'd like some."
"No, thank you,"
Jakes answered, maroon tie. The last man, who had steel gray hair and a white dress shirt, leaned back in his chair. "Show the first slide," he said. The slide projector operator focused quickly to show a satellite image of a dense jungle, in the middle of which a circular area had been absolutely flattened. The ground around it looked as if someone had stubbed out a gigantic cigarette there.
"This used to be a private ranch in Mexico.
Do you have any idea what might have caused this, Major Jakes?" the man in the charcoal suit asked.
"A daisy cutter,"
Jakes suggested, citing one of the fragmentation bombs used to knock down trees in the jungles for the purpose of clearing helicopter landing pads.
"Or a napalm burst."
"Neither," said the man with steel gray hair. "The scale is 1/2 a kilometer in diameter. Our seismic sensors revealed a sharp pulse, and our distant radiation detectors pinpointed a significant rise in residual radioactivity." Major Jakes perked up.
"Are you suggesting this is the result of a small nuclear strike?"
"We can think of no other explanation," the second man said.
"But who could have used such a weapon in Central America, sir? What would have been the provocation?"
The man with steel gray hair, who seemed to be the leader of the meeting, leaned back. "Our working assumption is that at least one and possibly many more of these tactical nuclear warheads have trickled out following the collapse of the former Soviet Union. In the chaos of the breakup of the socialist republics, many of the sovereign states laid claim to the nuclear stockpiles left behind by the central communist government. Many of those warheads have been, misplaced. We need you to take a team in and find the source of these weapons, then confiscate or destroy them. We cannot allow nuclear terrorists to run free, even if they are just murdering each other." The man with the maroon tie smiled, and his jowls jiggled. "It sets a bad example."
"I presume this will be a covert insertion, a search and destroy mission? But how am I to locate the target? What intelligence do we have that there are additional tactical warheads?"
"We have a strong suspicion," said the man in the charcoal suit. "There seems to be a military base located in one of the more isolated portions of the Yucatan. We've picked up a powerful transmission encoded with an encryption scheme unlike any we have ever seen before. The signal suddenly appeared a little more than a week ago, so powerful it could not be hidden. We suspect the transmitter indicates a secret military base there."
"Does the target correspond to any known location?"
Major Jakes said. "It is apparently the site of an isolated Mayan ruins. When we cross-referenced our records with those of the State Departments, we found that a team of American archaeologists disappeared there at about the same time the signal began, and only a few days before this detonation occurred. We suspect our enemies have taken over the ruins as their own secret military base. As no ransom demands or hostage threats have been forthcoming, the status of our American citizens remains unknown, and for the purpose of your mission, low priority."
"I understand," Major Jakes said.
He squinted to see the site on the map. The slide projector operator twisted the focusing ring around the lens to bring the photo into crystal clarity.
"Xitaclan,"
Major Jakes muttered, reading the label. "Xitaclan ruins, Sunday, 4:23 p.m. "Come quickly, amigos," said Aguilar and spread ferns aside. "Behold, Xitaclan." Sweaty and exhausted, Mulder stood beside Scully, his eyes suddenly bright with interest. Vladimir Rubicon sprang forward with renewed energy as if he had been jump-started. Scully shaded her eyes and looked out at the ancient, decaying city that might have cost the lives of Cassandra Rubicon and her team. The shadow of the vast ancient city could be easily seen like an after-image on the eyes. A towering, stair-stepped pyramid dominated the abandoned metropolis overgrown with vines. A deeply troubled look crossed Rubicon's face as he walked forward, turning from side to side. "I don't see much sign of Cassandra and her team here. No ambitious excavation work." Scully indicated where the trees and underbrush had been hacked away. "They were here not long ago," she pointed out. "The afternoon light is already fading," Aguilar said. "Perhaps we should make a quick inspection of the site and then set up our camp, eh? Tomorrow you can begin your real work." Scully spotted a narrow entrance passage at the ziggurat's bottom level that had been forced open, a doorway leading into the dark catacombs of the ancient monolithic structure. "Looks like someone went exploring," Scully said. Mulder went ahead of them around the path at the base of the pyramid and then called for them to come. She found him standing at the rim of a circular well at least 30 feet across that plunged down into the limestone as if it had been drilled there by a giant rig. "A cenote," Rubicon said. "A sacred well. It's a very deep limestone sinkhole. They're scattered all over the Yucatan Peninsula. Perhaps that explains one reason why Xitaclan was built at this location." Scully stepped up to a crumbling platform that must have been like a gangplank over the edge of the deep hole. "These natural sinkholes were considered to be sacred wells, water from the gods rising from the earth," Rubicon said. "You can be sure this one contains a treasure trove of relics and bones." "Bones?" Scully asked. "From people that fell in?" Were thrown in," Rubicon said. "The cenotes were sacrificial wells. Perhaps they would club the victims to death or just tie them up and weight them down so the bodies would sink." "I thought the Maya were primarily a peaceful people," Scully said. "That's an old belief, a false story promulgated by an archaeologist who admired the Maya beyond all common sense, and so he slanted his findings to downplay the bloodshed evident in the writings and carvings." "An archaeological spin doctor," Mulder said. "The Maya culture was quite violent, shedding a great deal of blood, especially in later periods due to Toltec influences. They considered it beautiful to scarify themselves, to hack off fingers and toes in self-mutilation ceremonies." Scully shuddered as she stood on the edge of the sinkhole, looking down into the murky cenote, thinking of all the secrets that the bottom of that deep, dark well might hold. Xitaclan Ruins, Sunday, 6:38 p.m. Standing near the edge of the limestone sinkhole, a tingle traveled up Mulder's spine, a brooding uneasiness, but he could not pinpoint its source. The water in the cenote began to stir and froth. Suddenly large bubbles belched to the surface, each as wide as a barrel, spewing gas from the depths. "What's going on?" Scully said. Mulder backed away from the rough edge as the vibration grew rougher beneath his feet. A wave of stench struck him, sour and sulphurous like 1,000 rotten eggs made into a giant omelet. He covered his nose, choking. Scully, who was accustomed to smelling cadavers and decay under even the most horrendous autopsy circumstances, took a cautious sniff. "That's sulfur dioxide, I think. It's a volcanic gas." "Maybe we should talk about this a little farther from the edge," Mulder said. They hurried back around to the front of the large pyramid. Mulder saw the trees swaying, the ground jumping and bucking. Aguilar's hand-picked Indian guides stood next to the half-erected tents, talking among themselves. One stocky man fled into the forest, shouting back at the others. "I wonder what their problem is," Mulder said. "Haven't they ever experienced angry gods before?" "That's seismic activity," Rubicon said, his voice sounding out of place, analytical. How can there be earthquakes, volcanic action? The Yucatan Peninsula is a high, stable limestone plateau. It is geologically impossible to have volcanic activity here." Seemingly to disprove him, the ground shuddered as if someone had struck it with a giant sledgehammer. But then, before the quake seemed ready to reach its peak, the tremors subsided. Rubicon smeared his goatee flat, occupying his shaking hands with some nervous gesture. I could be wrong about that seismic stability, he said. Aguilar pointed to campsite, empty and abandoned. It looks like we have lost our assistants for now, he said, his face ashen. They'll be back tomorrow, amigos. They are good workers. But we are on our own to prepare this evening's dinner and to recover from our adventure, eh? He forced a laugh which made Mulder feel decidedly uneasy. Mulder sifted through the scattered information he kept stored in his brain. He always tried to remember items that had the slightest unexplained or mysterious flavor to it. Volcanoes are unusual things, unpredictable. One called Pileggi suddenly appeared in 1948, right in the middle of a Mexican cornfield that was as flat as a tortilla. For 9 years afterward, the volcano continued growing, dumping over 1 billion tons of lava and ash. It buried 2 entire towns. Mulder looked from Scully over to Rubicon and then to Fernando Aguilar. I'd sleep lightly tonight and be ready to make a run for the jungle if a volcano starts erupting underneath our feet. An excellent suggestion, senor, Aguilar said, puffing on his newly rolled cigarette. Home of Peter Grobe, Quintana Roo, Sunday, 4:30 p.m. Police Chief Carlos Barrio stood at the entrance waiting to be noticed. Peter Grobe sighed and then turned from his contemplation. Senor Barrio, he said, your 15 minutes have begun. I have some items I was hoping might interest you, Excellency, Barrio said. Jade sculptures, Excellency. Grobe leaned forward. And what makes you think I am the slightest bit interested in purchasing contraband antiquities, Senor Police Chief? Grobe said. Are you trying to tempt me into an illegal act so that you can arrest me red-handed? Barrio stood back, appalled. Well, that would be height of folly, Excellency Grobe, he said. I myself have been to the devastated ruins of Xavier Salida's villa. It is inconceivable to me exactly what you did to retaliate against him, but the threat of your supreme power is absolutely clear, and I have no intention of crossing you. Grobe actually laughed. I am glad you fear me so, Senor Barrio, but I assure you I had nothing to do with the devastation that occurred at his household. Barrio reeled, off balance with the information. If not Grobe, then who had destroyed Salida? Who had that kind of power in all of Mexico? Xavier Salida has already paid for the indiscretion of stealing those antiquities. Now, I trust these jade artifacts you intend to sell to me are also from Xitaclan, Senor Barrio? I have no wish to incur the wrath of the ancient gods, Grobe said. Barrio had to sell some of this jade. He had to raise money to fight for the independence of Quintana Roo. Such superstitions, Excellency, he said. Surely a sophisticated European like yourself places no stock in ancient curses. He raised his dark eyebrows. Grobe's brown eyes bored into Barrio. With all of my money, I can install defenses against attacks from rival drug producers? But a suicidal religious fanatic is a threat against which few people can defend. He glanced at his watch. Your time is up, Senor Barrio. Barrio turned to the door. The Belgian drug lord called after him. Let me offer you something else of value. I have learned that a covert U.S. military team is coming to infiltrate Quintana Roo on a search and destroy mission. The commandos intend to find some weapons cache or military stronghold deep in the jungles. Perhaps it has something to do with the guerrilla revolutionary group Liberación Quintana Roo? He smiled thinly. The commando team is landing across the border in Belize, I believe. With a little snooping around, I'm sure you can get more detailed information. Thank you, Barrio said. Thank you, Excellency. His mind spun, no longer worried about raising money, but wondering what the U.S. military had discovered, and if his own plans for state independence might be threatened. Xitaclan Ruins, Sunday night. Mulder woke in the middle of the night to the sound of rustling and creeping noises. Close. Too close. He scanned the darkness outside his tent, trying to find its source, but he saw nothing, only shadows, no movement. Finally, just when he had convinced himself that he had heard nothing, Mulder caught a writhing flash, something stirring in the moonlight at the edge of the jungle. He spotted a huge serpentine body moving sinuously, slithering, plowing its way through the underbrush with incredible stealth. He saw a flash of flaming eyes, a glint of impossibly long scales. Then, with a flick of its lissom body, the thing vanished into the midnight shadows. Eventually, he crawled inside his tent and replayed the scene over and over in his mind. Sleep was a long time coming for him. Xitaclan Ruins, Monday, dawn. From not far off in the jungle, Mulder, Scully, and Rubicon heard a shout of excitement. One of the natives called over and over. "Let's go," Mulder said, running. "They've found something." Vladimir Rubicon puffed and wheezed, keeping up with them. Before long, they came upon another small temple, barely the size of a tool shed. Near the opening, one of the Maya helpers stood looking cowed while Fernando Aguilar snapped at him, his face stormy and livid. But the moment Aguilar saw the approaching Americans, his expression transformed miraculously. "Look what we have found, amigos," he said. "Equipment stored by Señorita Rubicon's team." "But why would she leave all this here?" Scully said quietly. "Look, food supplies and a radio transmitter," Aguilar said. "This large box has something else inside it." Aguilar bent down to scrutinize the crate. He gestured for one of the Indians to help him pry open the top. "Mulder," Scully kept her voice low, "do you know what this means? Cassandra couldn't have gone off in search of supplies. There's enough food here for weeks, and the team could have used the transmitter to call for help any time." Vladimir Rubicon eagerly bent forward to inspect the large crate, shouldering aside the Indian, and using his big-knuckled fingers to pull open the top of the crate while Aguilar stepped back to watch. "It's an underwater suit and air hoses," Scully said, puzzled. Was Cassandra intending to explore the cenote? "That makes good archaeological sense," Rubicon said, nodding vigorously. "In those deep wells, artifacts are preserved for centuries and centuries. Yes, she would have wanted to go down there, my Cassandra." Mulder pawed around the equipment packed into the crates. "Doesn't look like she had a chance to use the suit, though," he said. "The manufacturer's warranty sticker is still on it." "And she was interrupted before she could complete her investigations," Rubicon said. Mulder saw Fernando Aguilar flash a final angry glance at the Indian, who turned away, his shoulders slumped. "Yes, but interrupted by what?" Mulder said. Xitaclan Ruins, Monday, 3:10 p.m. A deeply offended anger burning behind Rubicon's blue eyes. "We'll complete our initial inspection of the area today, but if we haven't discovered any sign of them by tomorrow morning, we should use Cassandra's transmitter and contact the Mexican officials. Request immediate assistance. National forces, not locals. The locals are probably in on any black market trade." He scowled. "Many artifacts have already been illegally removed." Aguilar looked at him, his expression a combination of miffed annoyance and wounded pride. "What you seek could have been caused by treasure seekers from long ago, Senor Rubicon. Xitaclan has been unprotected for a long, long time." Rubicon glared at him. "Mr. Aguilar, anyone with eyes can see the fresh scars. I know these items have been removed very recently, within months, probably weeks. Then perhaps your daughter's archaeology team removed the most valuable pieces for their own profit, huh? They work for the museums back in America, do they not?" Rubicon bristled. "My Cassandra and all her team members would never do such a thing," he said. "They know the value of historical artifacts, especially artifacts that remain in place for further study." "I sense that you do not trust me, Senor Rubicon," Aguilar said, tugging on his hat. His voice held a conciliatory tone. "But we must work together, huh? We are isolated here at Xitaclan. We must make the best of it and not become enemies. It could be dangerous if we fail to work as a team." Scully headed back to their campsite as the discussion between Rubicon and the long-haired Mexican guide became more heated. Though it was broad daylight, the entire crew of Maya helpers had once again vanished into the jungles, nowhere to be seen. It made her feel strangely uneasy. She stopped to examine two tall stelae, elaborately carved with feathered serpents. She noticed a change in the dull-weathered limestone. Someone had rubbed blood inside the stone mouth of the feathered serpent, as if giving the carving a taste, a fresh sacrifice. She followed the trail of blood droplets down the tall pillar to the buckled flagstones at its base. "Mulder!" she cried. Her partner came running with an alarmed expression on his face. Rubicon and Aguilar stood frozen, their faces flushed from their argument, looking to see what had interrupted them. Scully indicated the bright red streaks on the stela, and then gestured to the severed human finger that lay in a pool of congealing blood on the flagstone. Mulder bent down to look at the amputated finger. The expression of disgust flickered for only an instant on his placid face. Aguilar and Rubicon finally came up and stared down without words at the blood, the severed digit. "It looks fresh," Scully said. "No more than an hour or so." Scully bent over to pick up the severed finger. It still felt faintly warm and rubbery. The thickened blood at the end did not drip off. She saw the ragged stump where the stone knife had hacked through the flesh and bone. If some of these people still practiced their violent religion, she wondered what other sacrifices they might have made. Xitaclan Ruins, Tuesday, 7:04 a.m. The camp was quiet and brooding, as if holding its breath. Scully stood up, hearing Mulder rustle inside his tent, but she stopped short when she turned to Vladimir Rubicon's tent. It had collapsed in the night, fallen in on itself, as if some giant beast had stomped it flat. Uneasy, she looked around, saw no sign of the old archaeologist, nor of Fernando Victoria Aguilar, nor of any of their Indian helpers. She called out, "Hello, Dr. Rubicon?" Mulder climbed out of his tent, stretching. "Dr. Rubicon seems to be gone," Scully said. "Look, something's happened to his tent. Did you hear anything last night?" Mulder immediately grew concerned. "Maybe he's just off looking for his daughter, getting a head start." "Okay, let's split up," she said. "Do a broad, rapid sweep until we find him." Scully was about to give up when she went to the edge and looked down, away from the plaza. Then she caught her breath. "Mulder! I found him! Mulder!" She looked devastated. "Over here," she said. They reached the fallen brick platform where sacrifices had once been performed at the edge of the deep circular well. Mulder stopped short and looked down at the murky and fathomably deep water. Scully stood next to him, swallowing hard, saying nothing. There, like a doll that had been twisted and broken and then cast aside, floated the body of Vladimir Rubicon, face down in the sacrificial cenote. Xitaclan Ruins, Tuesday, 11:14 a.m. Scully lashed a rope harness under Mulder's arms and around his shoulders. She tugged the knots, checking that they were secure. Gripping the rope, Mulder eased himself over the rim and started down the rough side of the limestone sinkhole. Mulder drifted away from the ledges and dangled. Immediately beneath him floated Vladimir Rubicon, his drenched shirt clinging to his bony back, his shoulder blades protruding. The old man's blonde-gray head was twisted at an odd angle, his neck obviously broken. But had it been broken by the fall itself, or from a direct physical assault? Mulder gritted his teeth and held his breath as he dropped the last few feet. He pulled himself over to Rubicon's drifting body. "Be careful, Mulder," Scully called. Touching the old man's waterlogged shirt, he pulled Rubicon's limp body toward him in the water, then worked the end of the rope around the bony chest. He felt as if he were embracing the archaeologist. "Goodbye, Vladimir Rubicon," he said, securing the knot. "Now at least your search can stop." Fernando Aguilar smiled. "Of course, Senor Mulder, that is a very good idea. It is good that we give up our search for Senorita Rubicon and her team. Yes, I will go get the transmitter." Mulder didn't tell him, though, that he had no intention of abandoning his efforts to find Cassandra. Scully had laid out Dr. Rubicon's body on the flagstones and began checking him over, trying to glean scraps of information from the condition of the cadaver. She pushed down on Rubicon's chest, feeling his rib cage, cocking her head to listen as she expelled air from his dead lungs. She looked up at Mulder, her eyes wide and concerned. She felt delicately around Rubicon's neck. Dr. Rubicon didn't trip over the edge and drop into the water. I think Aguilar wants us to believe he died by accident, but the evidence shows Rubicon was struck hard from behind. Something crushed his neck. My guess is that Dr. Rubicon was dead before he was thrown into that cenote. Aguilar didn't want him to make his transmission this morning, Mulder pointed out. Maybe that argument yesterday was more serious than I thought. What's he hiding? Scully said, "Don't forget that Aguilar led Cassandra Rubicon's team to this site in the first place, and now they're all missing. I think we have to presume them dead." "Do you believe he intends to kill us?" Mulder realized that was an absolutely serious question. He holds all the advantages here. "We still got our handguns if it comes to that." Her shoulders slumped. "Look, Aguilar knows how the United States comes charging in if something happens to their own agents. Remember when those DEA undercover officers were murdered here in Mexico? I don't think he'd be foolish enough to bring that upon himself. He can still write off Rubicon's death as an accident unless we prove otherwise, but he couldn't explain away all of our deaths as accidental." Mulder looked furtively around the plaza, seeing Aguilar and his ever-present Indian companions finally marching back out of the jungle. They carried a crate of equipment with them. Aguilar hurried up to them while the Indians hung back, afraid of Rubicon's body spread-eagled on the flagstones. "Senor Mulder," he said, "I have bad news. The transmitter is broken." Mulder said, "How could it be broken? We just took it out of the box yesterday." Aguilar shrugged. "Well, the weather, the rain, the conditions here." He held out the transmitter, and Mulder noticed that the inner workings were muddy and corroded. Scully said with forced brightness, "We'll just have to make the best of it then, won't we, Mulder?" He knew that she, too, felt trapped in the wilderness, with no contact from the outside, and the only people around them a potentially murderous crew who had no qualms about eliminating any inconveniences they might encounter. Xitaclan Ruins, Tuesday, 2:45 p.m. Scully felt the weight of the rubberized canvas diving suit on her shoulders, a heavy alien skin that muffled her movements and insulated her body. After finding the body of Vladimir Rubicon, her dread had grown. She had little doubt that the 5 members of the UC San Diego research team floated below the surface of the sacrificial well, waterlogged, decaying. If she did indeed find the archaeologist's daughter, beaten and drowned like her father, her only consolation was that Dr. Rubicon himself would not be around to witness the grim conclusion to their search. As Scully lowered the heavy helmet over her hair, Mulder's expression became serious. "Are you ready for this, Scully?" "It's part of the job, Mulder," she said. "Somebody has to go down and look." She lowered her voice. "Just keep your weapon handy. You'll be alone up here on the rim, and I'll be alone down there, not a strategically advantageous situation." Mulder had kept his 9mm Sig Sauer close at his side ever since discovering the old archaeologist's accidental death, but the Indians far outnumbered them and had shown no qualms about getting hurt if they intended to make another blood sacrifice. Scully and Mulder remained at the mercy of Fernando Aguilar to get them back out of this jungle. "I'm going down," Scully said firmly, her voice sounding hollow through the open faceplate. The murk swallowed her up like syrup, a primordial ooze that embraced her. Scully noticed a faint lambent glow deep below her, much farther than she wanted to descend, a blue-white light that seemed to seep from the bottom of the sacrificial well, a glowing mist that oozed from the porous limestone itself. As her eyes adjusted, Scully saw there could be no mistake. The haze of illumination pulsed and throbbed as if sending some sort of a signal. Her partner might have suggested the light was from a cluster of ghosts, remnants of Maya sacrificial victims. Vengeful ghosts or extraterrestrials? She knew that couldn't be true. Swallowing away her uneasiness, Scully switched on her flashlight. She turned in the thick, sluggish water looking around, and came face to face with a corpse. A bloated body hung in the water not 3 feet from her. The mouth hung wide, and tiny minnows darted out from between his jaws. It was a man, his dark hair drifting about in clumps. Rocks hung from cords tied to his waist. He had been killed and thrown into the cenote. Recently. Scully swung her flashlight like a lighthouse beam, sweeping through the undisturbed depths of the cenote. She did not linger on the corpse in front of her, but searched through the depths. The flashlight beam played across other stick-like silhouettes floating like smashed, waterlogged insects, sunk beneath the water. She had discovered the missing team of American archaeologists. Xitaclan Ruins, Tuesday, 4:16 p.m. The flagstone plaza was littered with bodies. Since the Indians had refused to help retrieve the bloated corpses from the cenote, it had taken Scully and Mulder hours to hoist the dead figures up to the top of the sinkhole one at a time. Mulder kept an eye out for anything suspicious, while Scully devoted her attention to the 4 wet corpses that lay beside Vladimir Rubicon's. "Since we have such a limited pool of possibilities," Scully said, "it'll be fairly easy to identify the 4 bodies. What about Cassandra Rubicon? Are you sure you didn't find her body down there under the water? It was dark and cold. Unless something happened to place her in a different spot, Cassandra's body wasn't down there. So we've solved one mystery, and now we're left with another that could be just as difficult." She examined each of the bodies. All 4 had been shot, most of them low in the back, in a paralyzing but not fatal blow. The similar placement of the wounds could not be accidental. The victims had been thrown into the sacrificial well while still alive. "We have some very bad people here, Mulder," Scully said. Mulder took out his pistol and held it as he continued to scan the jungle warily. "This is their backyard, Scully, and there's a lot of them. Why do I feel very much like another convenient sacrifice? Say like a turkey feels around Thanksgiving time." Scully moved next to him, closer than she needed to. They looked out at the wilderness, the only human beings in sight. Even with Mulder next to her, she felt very, very alone. Xitaclan Ruins, Tuesday, 11:17 p.m. Mulder sat on the flagstones watching the campfire, looking up at the moon, and listening to the songs of jungle insects. He looked over at Scully. He was glad to be there with her, rather than anyone else in the world. "Scully," he said, his voice quiet and serious, "with the unorthodox explanations I often find when studying the evidence, I know you're always skeptical, but every time you're at least fair to me." He looked at his hands. "I don't know if I've ever told you, but I really appreciate that." She looked at him and smiled. "You've told me, Mulder. Maybe not in words, but you've told me." He swallowed, then brought up the subject he had been avoiding. "I know you're probably not going to believe this either, but 2 nights ago I heard noises out in the jungle. I poked my head out to investigate, and I saw something moving. A large creature that wasn't like anything I've ever seen before. Well, that's not completely true. I've seen it many times before, but not in real life." "Mulder, what are you talking about?" she said. Out in the jungle, they heard other sounds, rustling noises, something large coming closer. Mulder perked up his ears and felt his blood run cold. "I think I saw one of those feathered serpents, just like that statue." He indicated the coiled feathered serpents engraved in the limestone column of the stela in the plaza. "It was larger than a crocodile, and it moved with such grace. Ah, Scully, you should have seen it. It reminded me of a dragon." "Mulder, that feathered serpent is a mythological creature," she said, automatically falling back into her role as a skeptic. Out in the jungle, the crashing, lumbering sounds became louder and louder. Some creature, unmistakably, was making its way towards Xitaclan as if drawn to a magnet. As the noise grew, it sounded as if many large creatures were converging on the plaza itself. Mulder raised his pistol. "Listen to that, Scully. I hope we don't get a chance to meet one of my imaginary feathered serpents face to face," he said. Scully suddenly became more curious than frightened. "Wait, Mulder, that's a mechanical noise," she said. As soon as she spoke, Mulder realized that the growling, grinding sound he heard was indeed an engine noise, the crunching of tires and the humming of generators. Then with a blinding roar, stars exploded in the sky, brilliant white glares like aerial combat. Fireworks shot into the air and burst like a white chrysanthemum. "Those are phosphorus flares," Mulder said. "A military issue." Under the glare of the scalding white light, 2 lumbering all-terrain vehicles smashed through the fallen underbrush and rolled up onto the flagstones of the Xitaclan Plaza. Behind the ATVs, dark figures wearing camouflage outfits scrambled out of the jungle. They crept low, holding their rifles, snapping abbreviated instructions to each other as they rushed into position like army ants swarming to a new nest. "What's going on here?" Scully said. "Those are Americans," he said. "U.S. military. Some sort of commando operation." Mulder and Scully sat frozen next to their little campfire, hands raised, pistols in non-aggressive positions. The commando squad ran up and surrounded the two, pointing rifles at them. "I knew I should have paid that parking ticket," Mulder muttered. While two of the soldiers aimed rifle barrels directly at their chests, another man crept forward and cautiously removed Mulder and Scully's weapons. The phosphorus flares had gradually faded out. Several of the camouflage commandos rigged up brilliant arc lights, flooding the plaza with a harsh glare. A slender, dark-skinned man marched up to Mulder and Scully, clearly in command of the operation. "Habla español?" the major demanded. Scully leaned forward. "We speak English," she said. "We are Americans, special agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The commandos stopped and looked at each other. The major stood rigid. "What are you doing here?" he said. "Well, we can ask you the same question," Mulder said. "My partner and I are here on a case involving missing U.S. citizens." Scully reached into her pocket. The soldiers tensed, but she moved slowly enough. "I'm going for my ID," she said, and carefully withdrew her badge and photo identification card. Mulder looked at her, amazed that even here in the jungle she still kept her ID in her shirt pocket. "We are legal attachés, legats to the U.S. consulate," she said. "Our assignment here in Quintana Roo is to search for a missing archaeological team." "Actually, we've already found most of the missing team," Mulder said, pointing to the 5 bodies on the plaza. Major Jakes gazed around the ruins and the plaza. "Continue securing the site. This isn't what we expected to find, but we still have our orders. We must complete the mission, destroy this command outpost, and be gone before morning," he said to his soldiers. "While you're at it, do you suppose you could give us a lift out of here?" Mulder said. "If you have room in the back seat of one of those ATVs, I mean." "If the parameters of the mission allow it," Jake said, his voice entirely deadpan. "What is your mission, Major?" Scully asked. "To destroy this military site," he said matter-of-factly. "This is a military site?" Mulder said in astonishment. He spread his hands to indicate the crumbling pyramid, the weathered stelae, the fallen temples. "These are ancient Maya ruins, abandoned for 1,000 years. My partner and I have been here searching for days, and we haven't found the slightest evidence of high technology or stored weapons. This place has no military significance whatsoever." Then, as if specifically to contradict him, a rain of automatic weapon fire showered from the shadows of the jungle, pelting the commando team. As the sharp, high-pitched shots rang out with a sound like a chainsaw, Mulder tackled Scully, knocking her down beside the meager shelter of their low tents. Scully could see winking flashes of fire as hidden snipers continued the attack. Major Jakes and his commando squad exploded into action, their own response as fast as a swarm of angry wasps. "Get to cover, everyone!" Jakes shouted. "Fire at will!" "Of course, I could be wrong about this place having no military significance," Mulder said, breathing hard, close to Scully's ear. "Are you hurt?" "No," she said, panting. "Thanks, Mulder." Though Scully could not determine where the shots came from, the American commandos responded with an impressive display of firepower, the quantity of bullets sufficient to make up for their lack of a precise target. One of the soldiers next to her spun around as if from an invisible force, and he sprawled on the broken flagstones. The young first lieutenant gasped and choked as bright arterial blood spilled from both the entry and exit wound in his rib cage. Scully could see at a glance that the young man had received a mortal injury. The soldiers sprinted back toward the 2 armored all-terrain vehicles. One man ducked behind the limestone stela. Another flattened himself behind the low tarpaulin-covered corpses on the flagstones. "Who's firing at us?" Scully demanded when she had caught her breath. The American commando squad continued blasting the trees, but they had only a slim hope of actually striking one of the shadowy enemies. Someone unseen screamed in pain, then renewed gunfire drowned out all the other sounds. A lucky shot from the jungle shattered one of the portable arc lights the commandos had erected. A deep voice bellowed out of the jungle. His crisp Mexican accent sliced through the night. "American invaders!" the man shouted. "You are illegally in the sovereign state of Quintana Roo. Your defiance of our laws and our borders is against all international treaties." As they both remained low to the ground, trying to remain minimal targets, Scully looked over at Mulder. She recognized the voice. That's the police chief, Carlos Barreo. Bullets sang low over their heads. But why is the chief of state police firing at us in the middle of the night, in the middle of the jungle? This isn't a law enforcement raid. Mulder raised his eyebrows. It seems Chief Barreo has gone out for some extracurricular activities. One of Major Jake's soldiers launched another garish phosphorus flare into the sky where it burned white hot, splashing a glare down upon the field that caused more confusion than illumination.
"Identify yourself!"
Major Jake shouted, crouching beside Mulder and Scully in the illusionary shelter of the tent.
"We have superior firepower!"
More shots spat from the trees, tearing holes through the fabric of the tent. Jakes ducked sideways, collapsing on top of Mulder and Scully. A furrow of blood appeared at his shoulder, merely a flesh wound, nothing serious. Major Jakes didn't even seem to notice.
"This is an act of war," Barreo shouted back. "You invaders have brought contraband arms into our land."
The gunfire dwindled as the guerrilla's leader spoke, with only a few sharp sounds peppering a flare-lit night.
"We cannot allow military intruders from the United States to walk off with our national treasures. We're not here to steal artifacts. We're just here to blow up the pyramid."
Mulder looked over at the major. Well then, if it's all just one big misunderstanding, maybe we can shake hands with him and talk about this. Major Jakes didn't appear to hear.
"It all makes sense now," he said. "These are freedom fighters, members of the violent revolutionary front in the Yucatan, Liberacion Quintana Roo. They want to make their own little country and secede from the Mexican nation regardless of what the rest of the Yucatan population wants. They don't have many weapons, nor do they have any moral compunctions."
Mulder looked at him coldly. "Unlike you and your men." Major Jakes returned the gaze, his expression blank, completely without anger.
"Correct, Agent Mulder." "Throw down your weapons and surrender," Barreo continued to bellow. "You will be arrested, charged as illegal aliens, and punished accordingly, unless your country chooses to extradite you."
Major Jake's nostrils flared. Since this was not an official mission, Scully knew the government would deny its existence and write off the commando squad. Jakes and his men would be abandoned to whatever kangaroo court or dim torture chambers the guerrilla group chose.
"My men will never surrender,"
Major Jakes shouted back, and more gunfire rang out.
"Not to cowardly snipers and not to terrorists."
"I always wanted to be in a real Mexican standoff," Mulder said. Scully knew that the covert American commando group might be able to outgun and outfight the Liberacion Quintana Roo rebels in a standing battle, but they could not escape or retreat with so many snipers hidden in the jungles. They were trapped at Xitaclan. The phosphorus flare fizzled and faded out, and the second arc light shattered, plunging the sight back into a darkness broken only by occasional gunfire and after-images on Scully's eyes.
"You two will stay next to me," Major Jakes said. "I realize you are both non-combatants, though I'm not sure there's a satisfactory way to resolve this."
"Then could we have our weapons back, sir?" Mulder asked, "since it's already come down to a fight."
"No, Agent Mulder. I don't believe that would be in your best interests."
Major Jakes turned his night vision goggles toward the forest. As she lay on the flagstones, another rumbling came. A quaking, as volcanic pressure built up beneath the limestone crust. "Scully, hang on," Mulder said. Major Jakes and his men did not understand what was happening. The ground bucked and shook as seismic forces writhed beneath them. The great pyramid of Xitaclan rattled and trembled. Blocks of loosened stone tumbled down the steep steps. From the jungle, some of the snipers wailed in terror, while Jake's commandos scrambled about in equal confusion. Steam blasted from small openings in the plaza flagstones. Little fumaroles spit through the ground, releasing tremendous pressure. "Come on, Scully, let's get out of here," Mulder shouted, tugging at her arm. "We can run. Use this as a diversion. Get to shelter." He stood and staggered away, the ground leaping like a carnival ride beneath his feet. Scully rose to join him, but Major Jake stood next to her, blocking the way.
"Not so fast, you two. You're staying here."
Angry shouts rang out from the forest, and Scully could hear trees toppling, uprooted by the tremors. She tried to stare down Major Jakes as he held his weapon at her, and she knew from the expression in his eyes that she couldn't flee. Mulder had already crossed half of the plaza, ducking and weaving, trying to get to the cover of one of the low temple ruins. Mulder turned back to her, an anguished expression on his face. He paused as if he meant to come running back, to surrender to Jakes in order to stay beside her.
"Just go, Mulder," she said. "Get out of here."
He took that to heart and put on more speed, dashing toward the cover of the pyramid's lower platform. Gunfire splattered against the uneven flagstones near his heels, bullets ricocheting into the night. She couldn't tell if the shots had come from the guerrillas in the jungle or from Major Jake's commandos. The ground lurched with one titanic jolt, and Scully heard a sound like muscles tearing, as if the ground below were giving birth. A giant pillar of steam exploded from behind the pyramid of Xitaclan, water boiling away and draining into the ground. She realized the steam explosion came from the cenote. A crack in the earth had split the bottom of the intensely deep well, dumping water into a volcanic cauldron. Scully caught only a glimpse of her partner's silhouette, but she knew with a dismay that made her chest ache that Mulder was running straight toward it, as if drawn. Xitaclan Ruins, Wednesday, 1:31 a.m. By the time Mulder reached the edge of the immense pyramid, the ground had stopped swaying and hiccuping beneath his feet. He felt anguished at leaving Scully behind under the protection of Major Jakes and his commando squad. But she had told him to run, told him to get away. If he could solve the mystery, find the answers that Barreo's guerrillas and the American soldiers both wanted, perhaps he could use it to gain Scully's freedom. He needed to discover the secret of the Great Pyramid of Xitaclan. What had Cassandra Rubicon found there? The abortive eruption and tremors had failed to produce gushing lava and ash. But as Mulder staggered toward the abrupt edge of the sacrificial sinkhole, he came to a quick stop and stared down, awestruck. As he ran, Mulder had watched the mushroom cloud of stinking steam pour into the sky as if from a boiler explosion. Now the sinkhole lay empty, dripping and crackling, like a dry, wide-open mouth. Mulder looked down into the gasping cenote. Deep below he saw a cold glow, a shimmer that throbbed and pulsed like a beacon shouting silently into the bottomless shaft. Scully had told him she'd seen a similar unsettling glow during her diving expedition. Phosphorescent algae growing far from the touch of sunlight, she had speculated. As Mulder stared at the faint haze, watching the flickering light, he could not accept his partner's scientific explanation. This rising and falling glitter seemed too orderly, too regular a pattern. Some kind of a signal. He thought of the Major's claim that the Xitaclan ruins were the source of some mysterious encrypted signal in a code the U.S. military could not break. But what if the transmission was not encrypted or encoded in any way, but simply in a language that Major Jakes could not understand, that no human had ever learned? Mulder stared down at the steep curving limestone walls of the empty sacrificial well. With the knobs and handholds and sloping ledges he could make the descent, probably. The glow called to him. He had to go down there. It had always bothered him. Why had the Maya people abandoned this lush, isolated site and so many of their grand cities? Why had they built Xitaclan here at all, far from the trade routes or rivers or roads? What had fostered the birth of their entire great empire? Why did the Maya develop such an interest in astronomical knowledge, calendrical cycles, planetary orbits? The glow grew brighter around him now, colder. Finally Mulder arrived, panting at a wide ledge, an arched opening, exposing a smooth rectangle of metal. The alloy frame was encrusted and corroded, but remarkably clean after centuries of submersion in the cold cenote waters. The shape and appearance of the portal was unmistakable, and Mulder reached out to touch it, his fingers trembling. The exposed opening was clearly some kind of a door, the door to a ship. The ancient metallic hatch opened with a drawn-out hissing breath of equalizing air pressure, a sound Mulder suspected similar to what a feathered serpent might make just before it attacked. Despite his desperate curiosity, Mulder turned away and held his breath, afraid of what toxins he might inhale inside the newly opened chamber. Whatever lay beneath the Xitaclan ruins had been entombed for centuries, and he had no way of knowing just what might lie inside this long-abandoned craft. He planted his foot one step through the doorway, feeling the solidity of the floor. The entrance corridor was smooth-walled and womb-like, the walls of polished metallic substance that absorbed the light and reflected it back. Mulder could not see any source to the glare. It was a blinding harshness clearly designed, he thought, for eyes adapted to the light of a different sun. The Maya had never been skilled metalsmiths, had no smelting capabilities to create the materials he saw around him. He proceeded farther down the corridor as if drawn. The winding passages opened up, revealing dark, half-collapsed chambers, what had been other metal-walled rooms. Mulder imagined Maya priests entering the sacred pyramid long after the alien visitors had vanished, still attempting to be caretakers but not knowing how. Generations and generations of awestruck visitors would have worn the floor smooth. Never before had he seen such overwhelming evidence, such incredible remains of an extraterrestrial construction. Mulder wondered if the craft itself had crashed, plowing a crater in the middle of the jungle. When the local and civilized natives had come to investigate, Kukulkan had taught them immense knowledge, fostering the birth of the great civilization. More than anything, he wished Vladimir Rubicon could have lived long enough to see this. Over the millennia, the Maya, or later treasure seekers, had stripped the derelict to the bone, leaving only the skeleton of the original ship. But it was enough. Mulder knew this proof could not be denied. If only he could bring Scully down here, where she could see. With a pang, he hoped she was still all right, that Major Jakes had at least protected her against a resurgence of the guerrillas, as a hostage if nothing else. His amazement doubled when he reached the next level. He had arrived at the chamber from which the glowing beacon emanated. He had to shield his eyes from the light, which burned so brightly that his skull hurt. This seemed to be the main chamber, he thought. The entire chamber remained virtually intact, its oddly complex protrusions, machinery, apparently functional. Mulder instantly realized that this place must have held enormous religious significance for the Maya. The curved desks basked in a bright glare that exuded like a watery spotlight from all the walls. Suddenly Mulder saw a silhouetted humanoid figure poised motionless in the far doorway, arms outstretched, legs partially apart. The silhouette looked slender, skeletal, distorted by the engulfing gel. Drawn like a moth to a flame, Mulder staggered across the sloping deck of the bridge to reach the narrow chamber, and he saw then that the silhouetted figure surrounded by the murky substance was that of a young woman with long hair and human features. Samantha. Mulder hesitated. The rational part of his mind knew it couldn't be his sister. It couldn't be her. Her face seemed surprised, her mouth partly opened, her eyes wide, as if she had been suddenly captured there like a photographic image. The gelatin grew clearer, as if stirred by unseen currents of energy. He noted her green-brown eyes, her petite figure that looked as if it could well have fit inside the diving suit Scully had used. Flowing, cinnamon-colored hair, a spray of fresh red scratches on one cheek. Of all the wonders that Mulder had seen and found inside the derelict ship, he was most surprised by this one. After their days of searching, he had finally found Cassandra Rubicon. Xitaclan Ruins, Wednesday, 2:33 a.m. Major Jakes bellowed orders for his forces to launch their all-out counterstrike. Startled gunfire rang out from the scattered Liberación Quintana Roo freedom fighters. But as trees erupted into gouts of fire and detonations thundered throughout the underbrush, Scully heard more wild outcries, panicked shouts, and screams of pain. A salvo of automatic weapon fire chattered back out of the trees. Two of Major Jake's commandos were hurled to the ground, torn apart by heavy-caliber bullets. One moaned, one didn't. "Stay under cover!" Major Jake shouted with a firm hand pressing Scully down beside the pathetic shelter of the low tents. One of the grime-smeared, breathless young commandos came running up. "The enemy seems to be falling back, sir," the young soldier said. "Temporarily, at least." Major Jakes nodded. "Superior firepower is always enough to intimidate upstart forces. I want you to run and get a damage assessment." "I can give you a preliminary, sir," the soldier said. "At least 4 men down, 3 fatally, 1, well, it looks pretty bad, Major." Jakes looked deeply stunned as if the wind had been knocked out of him. Then he drew a deep breath, the nostrils of his aquiline nose flaring wide. 6 left, he said. Another soldier came up, bleeding from the right side of his rib cage. He didn't allow the injury to slow him down. "The guerrilla forces disappeared into the trees, sir," he said. "We suspect they're regrouping for another assault." "They know they can't outgun us," Jake said.
but they can wait us out.
By what right do you come in here and attack a sovereign country and destroy a site of priceless archaeological value? Scully demanded. These ruins are thousands of years old, never before studied by science or historians. You have no proof that this is some weapons stockpile or revolutionary base. Major Jake scrutinized her identification again and handed the wallet back to her.
Very well, Special Agent Scully of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, he said. Let me show you my evidence. Since you are already inside the security restrictions of this mission, you're bound by the legalities and classification of what you've seen.
I have a security clearance and I know how to keep my mouth shut, Scully said. But I don't have any answers. Yet.
Come with me, please, he said. Over to the lead vehicle.
Without waiting for her, he ducked and ran toward the ATVs. Scully scrambled after him, imitating his evasive pattern as she remembered the training she had undergone at Quantico. From a sealed compartment, Major Jakes removed pictures and files printed out on flimsy water-soluble paper. He pulled out 2 curling black and white satellite photographs. They were blurred as if they had been faxed several times.
This photograph shows what remains of the stronghold of a major Central American drug lord, Xavier Salida, Jakes said. Salida was untouchable. Too many corrupt politicians in his pocket. That's always the problem with the drug lords out here.
Scully bent closer to study the satellite photograph. Is this what you intend to do here at Xitaclan? Leave a big crater?
The crater radius and the condition of the surface, as well as concurrent seismic evidence and a faint atmospheric flash detected by one of our side-looking horizon satellites, allows us to draw only one conclusion. Without question, this is the result of a tactical nuclear strike.
You mean somebody lobbed an atomic bomb at a Mexican drug lord? Scully said in disbelief.
That's what the evidence conclusively proves, Agent Scully. Nothing else could have released this much heat and energy in a single burst. A certain number of displaced nuclear armaments may have been diverted during the breakup of the former Soviet Union. It's possible some of these lost assets may have fallen into the hands of terrorists. These slimeballs do a better job of eliminating each other than we do of apprehending them.
Scully stared at the curled photo again. With a nuke? Isn't that going a bit overboard? Major Jakes sidestepped the question.
We also know that the revolutionary group Liberación Quintana Roo, the gentleman shooting at us this evening, have been gathering up weapons for their hopeless fight against the Central Mexican government. We are greatly concerned that one or more of these missing tactical nuclear weapons may have fallen into their hands. We believe the guerrilla group would hold few compunctions against using it in a major populated area.
Scully nodded. She wondered if the murders of the archaeology team had something to do with gun-running activities, weapons sales to drug lords. Could the illegal revolutionary group have been using Xitaclan as a secret base, undiscovered until a nosy team of American scientists came in to poke around? But that didn't help Mulder, who had run off in the direction of the pyramid 2 hours ago. She hoped he hadn't been taken prisoner by the revolutionaries or shot. That still doesn't tell me why Xitaclan, Scully said. There are no roads, no facilities, no power. Obviously it's not a high-security compound. Why an all-out strike in the middle of nowhere? Jakes reached over into the control panel of the all-terrain vehicle. He switched on the flat-screen grid, which glowed gray and silvery blue before the images resolved into a topographical line drawing of a close-up of their location, centering down from the overall Yucatan Peninsula. Jakes punched several commands, and the map zoomed to a smaller and smaller scale. A pulsing light throbbed from a location on the map like a sonar signal or a heartbeat.
This transmission emanates from here, Agent Scully. Prior to the strike on Xavier Salida's fortress, the signal appeared on our military receivers. It seems to be encoded. We cannot determine its origin or its purpose, but we believe the signal is linked to these activities. Therefore, my team has been given orders to penetrate whatever defenses might surround this isolated jungle base and to destroy the transmitter.
Scully watched the pulsing signal. How do you know that's a military transmission? She said. If it's in a code you don't understand, you have no reason to believe it could be a threat. That's quite a leap of logic. Major Jakes remained staring at the screen, his dark eyes intent.
Our intelligence has classified it as a military threat.
What intelligence? Scully said, gripping the side of the vehicle. What do they know beyond what you're telling me?
It's not my place to question them, Agent Scully, Major Jakes said. I need only to know the target and the objective. My commando squad is tasked with carrying out those orders, not in debating them.
An injured soldier staggered up to the all-terrain vehicle, panting. Scully noted that the narrow gash in his side had split open, spilling fresh blood into his uniform. "All set up, sir. Ready to rock and roll as soon as you give the order."
Very well.
Jake straightened, crossing his arms over his chest.
Let's take that pyramid down.
Scully looked toward the silhouetted ziggurat and the flickering flames from jungle fires, wondering if Mulder had found shelter. "Let her rip!" a young voice shouted. Scully watched in horror as the commandos began to launch explosive mortars into the ruins. Xitaclan derelict ship, Wednesday, 2:41 a.m. When Mulder finally recovered from the shock of finding Cassandra Rubicon, he stepped as close to the suspended figure as he could without touching the strange gelatinous substance. He couldn't risk damaging anything here, and he had no intention of becoming trapped as the young woman had. But this was incredible. Through the amber, Cassandra did not look lifeless. Mulder had seen enough corpses to know. Assuming that this place was indeed a buried spaceship, he wondered if this could perhaps be some sort of suspended animation chamber. A stasis booth where time would stop for extraterrestrial explorers making an incomparably long journey across the void of space. He had seen the same idea in plenty of science fiction movies. Maybe the aliens had thought of it for themselves. He searched the walls beside Cassandra's glowing doorway but found no controls, no status indicator, no colored buttons that might show him how to unthaw the frozen substance. So instead he reached out to touch the cold, dim gel himself, imagining that perhaps he could just take Cassandra Rubicon's hand and raise her up out of her glass coffin like the prince awakening Sleeping Beauty in the forest. When he touched the cold, gelatinous wall, it burst, popping like a soap bubble. Puddles of slick, volatile liquid splashed across the floor plates. Coughing and gasping for breath, Cassandra Rubicon lurched at him, already running as if she had paused in the middle of a panicked flight. Dripping wet and horrified, she crashed into Mulder and screamed. He reached out to defend himself as she drove him to the floor, pounding him with her fists. "No!" she croaked. "Leave us alone!" She grabbed the heavy flashlight that hung from her waist and swung it at Mulder as if it were a large metal club. He reached up to defend himself and pinned her hands in the air. "Easy. I'm with the FBI, federal agent. I'm here to save you." She trembled and held herself motionless, but coiled, vibrating like a tightly wound spring. There was someone shooting, and a bright light. She looked around, her muddy green eyes unfocused. She smeared thin slime away from her face, shuddering and dazed. She seemed to drift in and out of coherence as if her brain had not yet entirely unfrozen. Mulder sat up guardedly, still keeping his eye on her. He knew he must look a frightful mess, battered, muddy from the climb down the slippery walls of the cenote, sweaty from days of trekking through the jungle. But coated with the volatile ooze, the young woman looked far worse. He brushed at his shirt. "I take it you're Cassandra Rubicon," he said. When she nodded, he continued, "You and your team have been missing for over 2 weeks." "Impossible," she said, then coughed again, wiping her hands on her pants in disgust. "We just got here a few days ago." She sniffed at her wet shirt. "What is this stuff?" Mulder shook his head. "Your father contacted us a week ago Tuesday. My partner and I came with him to search for you here at Xitaclan." He hesitated, but she needed to know. Better to give her all the shock at once, though he couldn't bring himself to tell her about her father just yet. "I'm afraid we found the other 4 members of your team dead, shot, and then sunk in the cenote." Cassandra blinked and looked around, clearing her throat. Her voice was rich and resonant, filled with more anger than fear. "Bastards," she said. These events had happened for her only moments before. "This stuff burns my eyes. Can't see very well." Mulder used his dry sleeve to dry her face. She continued talking. "I had just discovered the opening to this place. I came out to find my team gone, and those soldiers tried to take me prisoner." She squeezed her eyes shut and rubbed them again. Mulder suddenly realized the throbbing SOS signal had ceased as soon as he had released her from the alcove. The diaphanous light throughout the main chamber began to fade. The signal had stopped, and now the derelict ship seemed to be waiting, settling back to sleep. Tears streamed out of Cassandra's reddened, irritated eyes. Mulder wiped her face again and decided it would be too much for Cassandra to believe they were inside a derelict ship, an extraterrestrial spacecraft buried beneath the pyramid of Xitaclan, or that he thought she had stumbled upon a lifeboat. She must have activated its automatic system, which placed her in suspended animation. Mulder stood and helped her to her feet. The cold, wet gel began to dry into a thin coating on her clothes and skin. She swayed dizzily for a moment, then drew a deep breath. Mulder looked around, but the pulsing signal had not resumed. He wondered again if her actions had triggered a distress call, a homing beacon. Perhaps the original inhabitant had tried the same thing but didn't succeed because his lifeboat chamber must have been damaged somehow. Mulder decided it was time to get moving. Thanks to your explorations, we know there's a passage through to the pyramid level. I still can't see very well. Cassandra followed close beside him as they picked their way away from the main chamber. Then she asked in a hesitant voice, "My father, did he come with you?" Mulder swallowed, his heart leaden. The passages around them grew darker. "Yes, he came with us. We tried to have him wait for us back in the States, but he wouldn't hear of it. He wanted to help you himself," he said. "But Dr. Rubicon, he was another casualty of the people who tried to kill you. I'm sorry." Cassandra stopped in mid-step and swayed, leaning into the rough wall where metal plates had loosened and fallen to the floor. She looked as if Mulder had just punched her in the stomach. She said nothing but slid down, squatting where the wall met the floor. She drew her knees against her chest. She stared at her dirty hands. "I'll go on ahead and find us the way out," Mulder said. "You take the time you need." Cassandra nodded, intensely weary. With a last glance back at her, Mulder set out, trudging up the slope. His heart pounded, heavy with grief for her, filled with amazement for the things he had already seen, yet with an equivalent amount of dread for what he might encounter up above. The battleground, the snipers, the explosions. He hoped Scully had managed to keep herself alive and safe. The passageway became dimmer, the walls made of vitrified stone. He realized he had emerged into the pyramid levels again. Then he turned the corner and came face to face with Carlos Barreo. The police chief's flashlight beam shone through the dimness, pinning Mulder like a moth in a specimen box. Barreo held out a nickel-plated revolver, pointing it at Mulder. "Agent Mulder," he said. His lips formed a humorless smile. "I thought I might find you inside the pyramid. Unfortunately, I cannot allow you to leave here alive." Xitaclan Ruins, Pyramid of Kukulkan, Wednesday, 3:27 a.m. Mulder took a step backward but found no escape. Barreo's police revolver pointed directly at him, unwavering. Mulder could not see the man's finger on the trigger. He would never know when it began to squeeze, when the gunshot would ring out. Once again, Mulder wished fervently that Major Jakes had left him with his own weapon. "Let me make a wild leap of logic," Mulder said, taking another gradual step back, "and guess that you were the one responsible for killing the archaeology team members?" He carefully began backing down the corridor. Barreo shrugged his broad shoulders. "Liberación Quintana Roo required the funding." Mulder took another step backward, the flashlight beam dazzling his eyes. Barreo seemed amused at his attempt to escape. "And I suppose Fernando Victorio Aguilar would find customers for you?" Mulder said. "He's in this too, isn't he?" "With the fortune we made from these sales, I was able to finance much of our revolutionary activities, while Aguilar just made himself rich," Barreo snorted. "It is distressing to see a man with goals that serve no purpose other than his own greed." "Yeah, I can see how you're much more admirable," Mulder said. The slope was steep. He continued backing down, kept talking. Barreo followed, confident, watching his victim proceed deeper and deeper into the trap. "But why kill the archaeologists?" Mulder continued. "You just called attention to yourself. They were Americans on a sanctioned visit by the Central Mexican government." "Ha!" Barreo snorted. "We had intended to take the Americans as hostages, that is all. Political hostages. That would have given us a platform to make our wishes known.
Liberacion Quintanoru has sufficient public support among the locals, sufficient weapons. We decided it was time to make our move.
Mulder raised an eyebrow, but I suppose they were shot trying to escape. And then you had no choice but to throw them into the cenote.
Some of our revolutionaries still believe in sacrifices to the old gods,
Barrio said, shoving the revolver closer. He shone the flashlight directly into Mulder's eyes. Mulder blinked and held up his hands as if to ward off the bright beam, stepping back toward a corner.
We all have to make sacrifices.
Mulder backed around the corner, unable to believe that Barrio kept stringing him along, kept playing him. The police chief followed him, closing the distance for the last time. Barrio grinned, flashing white teeth in the dimness. Mulder knew his time had run out. As the burly man rounded the corner, Cassandra Rubicon stepped out of the shadows, holding one of the metallic plates that had fallen off the walls. She hefted it over her head and brought it crashing down against the side of Barreo's skull. His policeman's cap toppled to one side, his body toppled to the other. Still barely able to see, Cassandra dropped the plate with a loud clang, amazed at what she had done. Carlos Barreo grunted in pain and shock, reeling, stumbling into the wall. He was not dead, not even unconscious, just stunned for a moment. "Come on, we've got to run," Mulder said. She jogged after him, hustling back down toward the main chamber. Panting, they both ran down the slippery slope. Moments later, with a bellow of rage, Carlos Barreo came charging after them. He fired his revolver twice, and the bullets plowed gouges along the walls, ricocheting into the darkness. Gasping for breath, Cassandra said, "Men shooting guns. That was what led me down here in the first place. I still can't see. My eyes, they burn." Mulder led her along, guiding her as she tried to clear her vision and find her way. He guided her behind one of the glistening metallic mounds. "Stay down here," he whispered. "Do you actually have a plan?" Cassandra said. "Or are we just running?" Running seemed like a good idea at the time. Mulder swallowed and came to a stop in the confusing but awesome main chamber. Then Carlos Barreo staggered into the room, weaving unsteadily on his feet. His eyes seemed unfocused, and he blinked repeatedly as if to stop his ears from ringing. Blood poured from a gash in his scalp, wetting his dark hair, dribbling around his ear and down his cheek.
"What is this place?" he roared.
Barreo staggered forward and swiveled the revolver around, shooting blindly. The bullet struck the central mound of metal shapes and crystals, sending up sparks and blue-green fire that rippled out in icy cold flames. Hoping to distract the police chief somehow, Mulder grabbed a small broken lump of crystal from the rough floor and hurled it, hoping to strike Barreo in the head, but he missed. Barreo caught the swift motion past his face and whirled, hearing the clunk strike the wall inside the narrow alcove, the chamber that had held Cassandra suspended. He charged toward the sound like a 500-yard dash runner, waving his pistol. Barreo fired once and strode into the lifeboat chamber. Suddenly a flood of light poured over the police chief like a waterfall of lightning. Mulder shielded his eyes. Barreo hung motionless, like an exhibit in a museum, one breath half indrawn, his eyes still hot, though dazed, the blood petrified along his cheek. Mulder heard the dull throbbing begin again inside his head as the derelict signal thrummed once more from within the wrecked ship, the SOS, the reactivated homing beacon. But whom it meant to summon, Mulder could not guess. Cassandra picked herself up from the floor, panting. She brushed herself off, looking satisfied. She shook her head as if to clear her thoughts. Creeping forward, she stood just in front of the glowing light wall, squinting slightly and trying to focus her eyes. Mulder took his place beside her, staring in, feeling his heart pound. The young woman shook her head and directed a cool smile at Barreo. "At least I'm standing on the right side of the wall this time," she said, "and I like it better this way." Xitaclan Ruins, Pyramid of Kukulkan, Wednesday, 3:51 a.m. When the thunder started from above, Mulder turned up to see the main chamber's ceiling vibrating, trembling. "Those sound like explosions," Cassandra said, crouched beside him. Yes, Mulder agreed. It's bombs exploding. I think Major Jake's military tactics have heated up just a little bit, and I don't know if this old ruin is going to take much more pounding. I'm not too keen on the idea of being buried alive, are you? Together they scrambled up the steep ramp, leaving the murderous police chief trapped in his coffin of light. If everything turned out all right, Mulder figured he could always come back and arrest Barrio later. Eager to escape, Cassandra pulled ahead of him as they reached the partially blocked passage where the stones had tumbled across the corridor. The barrel-chested Barrio had opened a wide enough passage for both of them to crawl through. Cassandra scrambled up into the dusty opening, wriggling her way ahead. Mulder gave her feet a push, and the muscular young archaeologist disappeared into the shadows. She twisted around and returned, reaching down for his hand to help him up. With surprising strength, she dragged him across the broken stone and into the cramped opening. He pushed his way past a shard of rock and tumbled beside Cassandra into the upper corridors of the Xitaclan pyramid. Mulder looked around and brushed himself off. More thunderous booms sounded from above and outside, closer now. Mulder shone his flashlight beam to see a snowfall of dust pattering down through the ceiling stones. One of the support beams, jacked into place by the lost archaeology team, began to groan from the strain. "We'd better hurry before it gets even cozier around here," Cassandra said. Another explosion struck much closer. The pyramid floor and thick stone walls rocked. The hand-hewn limestone blocks rattled together like chattering teeth. "I think they're aiming to take down the pyramid." "Nothing like respect for antiquities," Cassandra said. They turned the corner and just up ahead saw the opening that led out into the wide plaza. Outside, the night was lit by fires in the jungle and dwindling white flares from burning phosphorus. "I'm not sure it's a good idea to run out into the middle of that," Mulder asked. "Keep your head down." Just then he saw the flash, heard the whistle, and instinctively grabbed Cassandra. He dove with her against the wall. One of the mortars hurtled into the stair-stepped facade just above the doorway, detonating with a monstrous roar of fire and smoke and blasted debris. An avalanche of rubble, rocks, and chiseled limestone blocks collapsed to block the entrance. The low ceiling of the claustrophobic corridor split open and fell in as Mulder dragged Cassandra deeper into the tunnels, both of them blinded by the flash and the sudden darkness. They staggered back the way they had come. "This is getting ridiculous," Cassandra wheezed. "We'll never make it out of this pyramid." "Back to the drawing board," Mulder said. "Let's try the passage I used to enter this place. Third time's the charm." Down, deep underground, Mulder followed the image in his excellent memory, though he cheated a little by spotting his own footprints scuffed in the dust of the long abandoned corridors. "This passage leads out to the cenote," Mulder said. "Once there we'll have to climb up, hand over hand." "The cenote?" Cassandra said. "We must be below the level of the water. Are we supposed to swim or what? At least I can wash the rest of this slime off." Mulder looked at her, surprised. "Oh, I forgot to tell you, the sacrificial well is just a big empty hole in the ground now, thanks to the last tremors." "Tremors? What tremors?" Cassandra asked. "You've been sleeping for a long time." Wiry as a wildcat, Cassandra found tiny outcroppings that even Mulder didn't dare try. They picked their way around the circumference, ascending at an angle, completely encircling the sacrificial well until they reached the right height to grasp the ragged ends of the dangling ropes. From deep below, volcanic vapors continued to gurgle and belch and gasp. Mulder knew that the eruption had not yet peaked, but had merely paused to gain its second wind. Silently deciding to keep themselves low, Mulder and Cassandra raised their heads up, peeping over the edge to where they could see the pyramid of Xitaclan silhouetted in the firelight. Half of its side had sloughed down. Mortar explosions had gouged great craters into the carefully crafted hieroglyphic stairs. Mulder saw other people running in the plaza, dim forms scurrying for cover. Both of the carved feathered serpent stellae had toppled over, and only one of the tents remained upright. Mulder could see cautious figures scrambling about in camouflaged uniforms. One wore a different outfit. Scully. Before he could haul himself over the ledge, though, a renewed outcry came from the jungle, shouts in the guttural Maya language. A loud crackle of gunfire came in a staccato burst as the regrouped guerrillas charged out of the cover of the trees. The revolutionaries fired at the surviving members of the military team, who responded in kind. Gunshots grew into a deafening hail of sound in the sky. 2 more phosphorus flares soared into the night, overwhelming the light of the moon. Xitaclan ruins. Wednesday, 3:26 a.m. After repeated direct hits from the mortars, the ancient pyramid looked ready to collapse. Heavy blocks jarred loose from where they had rested for centuries tumbled down, smashing the intricate carvings and glyphs. The pillars of the apex temple platform had all fallen over. The feathered serpent statues blasted to dust. An avalanche began along the eastern face of the ziggurat, roaring down the steep stairs and adding to the nighttime din.
"We've almost got it," Major Jake said. "A few more direct hits, then our mission will be accomplished. Gather the casualties. We can fall back."
"No! We can't leave Mulder," Scully shouted. "We have to find him. He's an American citizen, Major Jakes. Your actions have put him into the middle of an illegal military action, and I hold you personally responsible for his safety." Jakes looked at her again with his placid dark eyes.
"Agent Scully, I'm not even here. My team is not here. Our mission does not exist."
Then a bullet took him high on the left shoulder, spinning him around and hurling him into Scully, knocking them both to the ground. He grunted, but did not cry out in pain. Major Jakes heaved himself off of Scully with a barely restrained hiss of pain. He stood up and squeezed his shoulder. Blood welled up in his uniform. He looked down at her, and she saw the splatters of blood staining her own jacket.
"I apologize for bleeding on you," he said,
then offered her a hand up. The commando closest to the mortar launcher fell backward without an outcry, his head suddenly splashed with bright red.
"Another down,"
Major Jakes said. He looked at his own bleeding shoulder.
"My team is dwindling with every moment."
"Then we've got to get out of here," Scully said, clamping her teeth tightly together. "Find Mulder and go."
"This mission is not yet accomplished," Major Jakes said.
The guerrillas, bolder now, came out of the trees, firing. Major Jake's commandos shot back, though their defense seemed to be crumbling. One of the soldiers launched a grenade into a knot of Liberación Quintana Roo fighters. It exploded right in their midst. Broken bodies flew, arms and legs akimbo, hurled into trees that also burst into flames from the backwash of the exploding grenade. The viciousness of the response caused the guerrillas' surge to falter. Major Jakes grabbed Scully's arm.
"Come on. I want to get you back to your tent. You'll take shelter there so I can concentrate on our defenses."
"That tent isn't going to offer me any protection whatsoever."
"It'll offer enough," Jakes said. "The attackers won't be able to see you. You won't be a specific target. That's the best I can do."
"I didn't ask you to—"
"Yes, you did,"
Major Jakes said.
"You said I was personally responsible for your safety."
With his good arm, he wrestled her into the flap opening of the tent. She struggled and turned around, shouting at the top of her lungs. "Mulder!"
"He can't help you wherever he is," Major Jakes said. "I'm trying to protect you, ma'am."
She glared at him. "I need for him to know where I am."
"Just get inside the tent, ma'am."
She bristled. "Don't call me ma'am."
"Don't force me to be rude."
Defeated and helpless in the middle of a war zone, Scully crawled into the dim confines of the tent, huddling among the blankets. Major Jakes dropped the tent flaps back down. More gunfire rang out. Scully heard a gasp from Major Jakes and a thump. Outside she saw silhouettes, shadowy figures. Then a bullet tore through the tent, missing her head by inches. Another small circular hole ripped through the fabric, singed around the edges. She ducked down, flattening herself to the ground, and listened as the fighting continued outside. Xitaclan Battleground, Wednesday, 4:06 a.m. Mulder helped Cassandra over the limestone lip of the sacrificial well, then stretched out, relieved just to be on solid ground again. Exhausted, he tried to decide which direction to run that would have the least likelihood of getting both of them killed. Mulder felt sick in the pit of his stomach as he watched the destruction of the pyramid continue. The artifacts buried in the derelict ship would answer the questions archaeologists had wondered about for nearly a century. But every blast pummeled and crushed the evidence of extraterrestrial influence on the Maya culture. Now the answers were reduced to rubble and debris. He and Cassandra sprinted for cover every chance they could, stealing around the perimeter of the ziggurat. He intended to reach the base camp in the plaza. Despite its dangerous openness, the plaza was the most likely place for him to find Scully. That was his first order of business. That, and preventing them from getting killed. Another mortar sailed high and dropped like a wrecking ball onto the top platform where ancient priests had performed their bloody sacrifices. The pillars that supported the delicate temple of the feathered serpent had already crumbled and collapsed, slumping down into a mound of debris. Cassandra watched in dismay. First my team, then my father, and now this. This desecration. As if to defy her, another explosive detonated. The shock wave blasted debris from one of the stair-step terraces directly above them, causing a rain of broken blocks.
Look out!
Mulder said and dove toward Cassandra, but the shattered rubble dropped down on her like the proverbial ton of bricks. A jagged chunk of stone emblazoned with a partial Maya glyph clipped her across the top of the head. With a thin gasp of pain, she collapsed, bleeding from her scalp, a scarlet stain oozing into her mussed cinnamon hair. Mulder bent over her. "Cassandra," Mulder said, pushing his face close to hers. "Cassandra, can you hear me?" Her skin had a grayish color, and sweat broke out on her forehead. The young woman groaned and sat up, blinking and stunned. She shook her head and then winced. "Bullseye," she croaked, pressing a hand against her temple. "Ouch!" Mulder gingerly felt around on her scalp, probing the seriousness of the gash. Though she bled profusely, it seemed to be a shallow wound. His main concern was that she had suffered a concussion or fractured skull. He looked around, trying to focus in the uncertain strobe light of flares against the enveloping darkness. "If we can find my partner, Scully, she'll be able to give you emergency medical attention." He scanned the plaza, watching the scurrying figures, the smattering of gunfire like deadly fireflies blossoming into the night. Ahead in the open plaza, he saw a tall figure hustling a woman's petite form, obviously Scully, toward the tent. The two seemed to be arguing, and then the man pushed her inside, dropped the flap, and stood up to stand guard beside the tent. Was the man protecting her, or holding her prisoner? Mulder couldn't tell if he was one of the American commandos or one of Carlos Barreo's guerrilla freedom fighters. "Come with me, Cassandra," Mulder said, draping her arm over his shoulder and helping her to her feet. They stagger-walked toward the plaza. Mulder kept his eyes toward the indistinct figure standing next to Scully's tent. A chain of popping sounds cut through the scattered background noise. The commandos scattered again, but the guardian figure beside Scully's tent did not move fast enough. Mulder watched as the rain of automatic weapon fire nearly ripped him in half. Several bullets tugged at the peak of the tent like thick darning needles, and Mulder prayed Scully had kept herself low. "We have to get over there," he said with greater urgency. He and Cassandra reached the more distant of the two feathered serpent stellae at the edge of the plaza. Both carved pillars had toppled over, smashing the already disturbed flagstones. Some of the rubble had fallen across the tarpaulin-covered corpses he and Scully had fished out of the cenote, but the victims didn't seem to mind. Mercifully, Cassandra seemed too dazed to know what the shrouded forms might be. He helped her to crouch beside the fallen limestone monolith. Then, to Mulder's surprise, the din stopped. The combat field grew still and oppressive, as if a blanket of silence had descended upon Xitaclan. Mulder stopped moving, letting Cassandra lean back against the fallen pillar. He felt his skin crawl, and the hairs on the back of his neck tingled with static electricity. Mulder huddled next to Cassandra behind the stela. Some force in the air compelled his gaze upward. He watched the light come down from the sky. The glow came from inside and out of a huge vessel poised in the night. He saw it for only an instant, but his imagination supplied the remaining details. It was an immense construction, a dazzling chiaroscuro of angles and curves forming a geometrical shape that no architect had ever conceived. A blaze of light glowed around it like a halo, keeping all details indistinct. A ship. When Cassandra Rubicon had accidentally fallen into the lifeboat chamber, she must have triggered a pulsing message, a distress signal transmitted across the star lanes, a beacon shining along an infinite distance, until finally the rescue craft had arrived. Mulder recalled the blurred images of Kukulkan on the walls of the buried control chamber, the towering extraterrestrial visitors staring hopefully up at the stars, but the rescue craft had come more than 1,000 years too late for him. Cassandra groaned and blinked her eyes. "Daddy," she said. Mulder looked up again. The moment the luminous craft reached the partially demolished pyramid, long spikes of searing light burned from the ship's belly, glowing, pulling an invisible thread. Mulder gasped and shielded his eyes from the dazzling glare. Beneath him, the ground trembled, strained, ripping like a thin sheet of iron tugged by a powerful magnet. Temple blocks flew off the top of the ziggurat. The rubble blasted away on all sides. Debris pounded down around them like meteors. Cassandra shivered, her head injury plunging her into shock. Mulder understood everything now. Knew his speculations must have been correct. Xitaclan had never been rescued because his lifeboat chamber had failed, entombing him, but Cassandra's accident had once again summoned help from the stars, and now the rescue ship had come to excavate the derelict. The ground bucked and heaved as the dazzling craft devastated the remainder of the pyramid, leaving only ruins. Shouts and panic rang out from the jungle and from the surviving U.S. commando fighters. The light grew brighter, hotter in the belly of the hovering ship. More glaring beams lanced out. Finally, the inner pyramid lay bare, the original structure that enshrined the derelict ship. Suddenly darkness fell again, disorienting Mulder as the rescue craft floated silently over. He supposed it was probing, scanning, and then the brilliant beams ripped out again, titanic forces stripping away layers of the ground to excavate the skeletal remains of Xitaclan's ancient ship. The earth cracked and shook, until finally, with a great rending tear, the piercing light from the hovering ship ripped free the remains of the crashed craft. Mulder was hurled to the ground as metallic girders and curved hull plates protruded through the base of what had been the great Xitaclan pyramid. Risking blindness from staring at a light as bright as the sun, Mulder tried to watch as the rescue ship heaved Xitaclan's derelict entirely out of the ground, like a Maya blood priest ripping out the heart of a sacrificial victim. Dirt and stone showered all around them. Mulder ducked, confused by the garish shadows that had become razor-sharp in the backwash. Defying gravity, the crushed remains of the derelict rose into the air. The glowing rescue ship gained altitude with astonishing speed, tugging the skeletal girders along with it. Debris pattered around them, a blizzard of rubble that sprayed the entire site. Mulder gazed into the sky, his mouth dry, watching all hope of finding artifacts and incontrovertible evidence rising into the sky, forever out of his reach. The rescue craft had come like a soldier crossing enemy lines to bring back the dead. Mulder had no idea where the craft might go, what descendants of Xitaclan might mourn his mummified remains. Eyes stinging with tears, he stared as the brightness compressed itself into a blinding star that streaked off into the night, leaving him only with colorful after-images on his eyes. With a shock, Mulder realized that the Mexican police chief, Carlos Barreo, remained trapped in one of the lifeboat chambers. Perhaps Barreo would survive the passage. Or perhaps he had already been killed during the unearthing of the derelict. Either way, the extraterrestrial craft took the revolutionary leader along with it. Mulder knew this was one abduction he would not mourn, one alien kidnapping he would never bother to investigate. Good riddance, he said. He looked at the gaping, smoking crater where the pyramid had been, and groaned to himself. The ruins of Xitaclan, Wednesday, 4:19 a.m. Scully stood up on shaking legs to look around, blinking in the uncertain light of the burning jungle. Xitaclan seemed to be quivering in shock. Scully found Major Jakes where he had fallen. Heavy caliber bullets had ripped his chest apart. He lay sprawled in his own blood, staining the flagstones like another sacrifice to the ancient Maya gods. Scully turned around to stare at where the tall Xitaclan pyramid had once stood, but now she saw only a gaping crater. My God, she said, awed, feeling an uncontrollable urge to cross herself. Scully! The shout sounded like music in her ears, and she whirled around upon hearing Mulder's voice. Scully! Over here! She saw her partner, bedraggled and exhausted, supporting another woman who staggered next to him. The two of them worked their way across the plaza. Mulder, you're safe. She ran toward him. Let's not come to any premature conclusions, he said. His face was flushed, his eyes glazed with shock, or amazement. Scully, did you see it? Did you see it? He gestured frantically over to the crater where the pyramid had once stood. Scully shook her head. I was stuck inside the tent, so I didn't see much of anything, she said. Major Jakes is dead. So are his men. We should move out as soon as we can. We're all by ourselves, Mulder. She's hurt, Scully, Mulder said, indicating the reddish-haired woman he supported. She was hit on the head with a piece of shrapnel from one of those mortar explosions. Scully looked at the woman's head wound, saw that the blood was already clotting, matting her hair in place over it. Mulder, is this Cassandra? Where did you find her? It's a long story, Scully, and I'll tell you right now, you're not going to believe it. But she's here, living proof. Before Mulder could explain further, the ground began to writhe yet again. The flagstones shimmied from side to side as if some legendary titan buried beneath the earth's crust were trying to break his way out using a jackhammer. I don't think it's kidding this time, Scully shouted. A section of the flagstones blasted skyward as a geyser fountained up. The entire plaza shifted sideways as underground plates moved. The stress became so great that a fissure ripped the courtyard in two, tumbling the wall of the long-abandoned ball court off to the side of the pyramid ruins. The ground here is unstable enough. Mulder shook his head as if to knock the dazedness from his brain. With all the explosions, I think Xitaclan is about to become a thing of the past. Gouts of sulphurous ash spewed from the pyramid crater, an upside-down waterfall of lava and smoke. The limestone rocks cracked, igniting like candle wax. The ground split open, collapsing the sides of the drained and hissing cenote. Remember that new Pileggi volcano from 1948, Mulder said? My guess is that this place is going to erupt and keep erupting until we've got another national landmark on our hands. He helped the dazed Cassandra to her feet again. If it's all the same to you, Scully, I'd rather not have my name on a little memorial plaque near the visitors' center. Let's get out of here. The gunfire had ceased, the guerrillas having scrambled back into the destroyed jungle, their victory complete now that virtually everything standing at Xitaclan had been destroyed. Scully pointed to one of the all-terrain vehicles. We can take that ATV, get better speed through the jungles, though I have no idea where we're going. How about away from here, Mulder said. Do you know how to drive this thing? Scully looked at him. We're intelligent people, Mulder. We should be able to figure it out. But as she said it, she wasn't terribly convinced herself. Don't be so sure, he said. It's military technology. As she and Mulder helped the injured Cassandra Rubicon, they staggered toward the remaining vehicle under the lava firelight in the conflagration of the jungles. Yucatan Jungle, Wednesday, 5:01 a.m. Orange gouts of lava shot up into the sky behind them as Mulder fought to control the all-terrain vehicle. I'm used to driving Ford rental cars, Mulder said. This is a bit more challenging. Scully did her best to prop up Cassandra Rubicon's groggy form. She used a torn strip of cloth to probe her head injury, studying the seriousness of the gash. The young woman winced and tried to squirm away from Scully's ministrations. I'm all right, Cassandra croaked, and with a sigh slumped back into half-consciousness. Mulder plowed deeper into the jungle, but their pace remained maddeningly slow as he dodged tree trunks and boulders and crashed through thin streams and shallow trenches. Flames from the fresh crack in the earth backlit the jungle. Spewing magma boiled up from the open wound where the immense alien rescue craft had excavated Kukulkan's long-buried derelict. Greasy gray smoke roiled where the grenade launchers had blasted parts of the forest. This woman needs medical attention, Scully said, but she'll be all right for the time being. She looked over at Mulder, her blue eyes filled with curiosity, her eyebrows raised. So where has she been all this time? She was trapped down in the pyramid, Scully. Scully frowned skeptically. She doesn't look like a woman who's been in hiding for days and days. I see no signs of malnourishment or physical stress. He looked at her with a deep intensity, feeling the passion of his convictions bring a flush to his cheeks. I'll tell you everything once we get out of this alive. He squinted ahead and swerved again, struggling to find a reasonable course through the overgrown jungle. Check in the glove compartment, Scully. See if you can find a AAA map. Scully reached over and scanned some of the screens. Major Jake showed me a dossier file. Satellite images of an enormous crater left behind when a local drug lord was supposedly attacked by a tactical nuclear device. You'd probably consider it the result of some sort of alien technology gone awry. But let's not get into that. The Major had precise maps, topographical contours, detailed studies of the jungle. She shuffled around before letting out a defeated sigh, but all of that was in the other ATV, of course. On an impulse, she switched on a flat grid in the dashboard unit, which displayed a digital compass and a glowing LCD map of the Yucatan. "Well, here we go," she said. "I couldn't find the cigarette lighter or the radio, but this should do the trick." Mulder heaved a sigh of relief. Suddenly a slim and wiry figure charged out of the underbrush, striding in front of the ATV's path. His dark eyes narrowed with a fanatical gleam as he held a wicked-looking automatic assault rifle, no doubt taken from one of Major Jake's fleeing men. "I will shoot you now, or I will shoot you later," Fernando Victorio Aguilar said, thrusting the rifle toward them. "But either way, you will stop. Now." Yucatan Jungle, near Xitaclan, Wednesday, 5:26 a.m. Wrenching the controls, Mulder pulled the all-terrain vehicle to a halt. Aguilar's leveled rifle provided quite an incentive. From her seat, Cassandra groaned and brought herself close enough to consciousness that she blinked at Aguilar. "Him," she said. "Bastard. Abandoned us." Then she slumped back, as if that effort had cost her all the energy reserves she had managed to rebuild. Aguilar looked at her in shock, then jabbed his rifle at them. "Where did you find the archaeologist's daughter, eh? Barreo's men searched for days, but they kept getting lost in the pyramid." "She found a very good hiding place," Mulder said. "In fact, Senor Barreo found the same spot, but I don't expect we'll ever see him again." "What do you want, Aguilar?" Scully said. "For the moment, I'd like hostages, and this vehicle, señorita." All of his supposed plans had crumbled around him, but Aguilar still seemed amused by the entire situation. Mulder heard a crackle of branches overhead and glanced up at the trees. Aguilar saw the sudden movement and jerked his rifle back at Mulder. "Don't move a muscle," he said. Mulder didn't move, though he could still hear a rustling, creeping sound through the twigs high above. Other ferns began to stir behind Aguilar, but the guide kept his attention on the vehicle. "We were obtaining artifacts from lost Maya sites," Aguilar said. "Our Maya sites. It was like stealing, but no one got hurt. No one lost anything. Bueno. The jungle had buried these treasures for centuries, and now we were making money from them, eh?" He tossed his head. "The locals knew enough to leave these ruins alone. The American archaeology team should have known as much, and so should you." Then the branches overhead snapped and broke. To Mulder's utter amazement, a giant, sinuous shape dropped down like a gleaming tentacle, a coiled mass of muscle. Aguilar looked up and screamed, swinging the rifle, far too slowly, far too late. There was a gleam of translucent fangs as long as stilettos, as sharp as needles. A wide, hungry mouth flared. Feathery scales spread out in a crown around bony head plates, looking like beaten scales of precious metal. The monster moved, quick as lightning. Aguilar fell to the ground under the weight of the creature. The vicious reptile wrapped around him, squeezing its serpentine body like a braid of steel cables. "My God," Scully whispered. Aguilar screamed in pain as his bones cracked like dry wood. Then the huge serpent monster moved off into the underbrush, dragging its crushed victim along until the foliage and tangled deadfalls shielded the carnage from view. Aguilar screamed twice more. Then the noise was cut off with a high, gurgling pop. They could hear nothing more than rustling sounds, breaking bones and tearing meat. Scully sat next to Mulder, transfixed, her face pasty, white, her eyes wide, her lips pale and bloodless. "Mulder, Cassandra coughed groggily and croaked. "Xitaclan." Something fast and fluid rushed through the tangled underbrush on the other side of the all-terrain vehicle, moving too swiftly for Mulder to track. It slid through the creepers and ferns, then burst up with a spray of fallen leaves and moss-covered twigs, looking at them. Another feathered serpent, even larger than the first, reared up in front of them like a cobra before a snake charmer, baring its long fangs with a bubbling hiss, only feet away. The sinuous creature weaved back and forth in front of them, huge and intimidating, larger than any crocodile ever born, its feathery scales thrust out like spines.
Its breath came in a sharp, unending hiss, like steam forcing itself out of a boiler. What does it want? The iridescent, oily serpent moved with a blur like an optical illusion, as if its entire body were made out of quicksilver, as if it had been bred for a different gravity, a different set of environmental conditions. Mulder couldn't move. He simply stared at the beast, hoping none of his actions would intimidate it. As the monster fixed its attention on them, it stared with eyes of burning pearls, grunting with an unfathomable intelligence, driven by a brain of incomprehensible alienness. Mulder remembered the carvings, the stelae, the images of Xitaclan deep within the ship. These serpentine creatures had been the ancient extraterrestrials' pets, or companions, or helpers, or something else entirely. The creature in front of them stared, bowing closer. The moment froze in time. "Mulder, what should we do?" Scully asked. Mulder met the creature's burning, opalescent gaze. They stared at each other for a moment, a flash of understanding passing across a gulf vastly wider than any simple species barrier. Mulder realized he was holding his breath. Scully sat wide-eyed next to him, her knuckles white, her fingers clenched against the seat. Cassandra Rubicon groaned, staring at the creature with glassy eyes. Finally, the tension inexplicably evaporated, and the feathered serpent backed away, slithering into the underbrush. It vanished as quickly as it had come, leaving only broken and rustling branches behind. The forest fell silent again. "I don't think we'll have any more trouble with them," Mulder whispered. "I hope you're right, Mulder," Scully said, then swallowed hard. "But let's get out of here before one of those things changes its mind." Jackson Memorial Hospital, Miami, Saturday, 11:17 a.m. With a clean shave and clean clothes, and after a good night's sleep, Mulder felt like a visiting relative as he entered Jackson Memorial Hospital in Miami, where Cassandra Rubicon had been taken to recover from her injuries. With the aid of the ATV's computerized map, he and Scully had managed to work their way east toward one of the paved roads in the state of Quintana Roo. Then, like a survivalist senior citizen driving a "don't bother me or else" RV, Mulder barreled along the roads, terrifying shepherds and pedestrians. Using a small first aid kit she found in the all-terrain vehicle, Scully had taken care of the worst of Cassandra's injuries, giving her painkillers and applying disinfectant. She could do nothing more until they found an actual hospital. Finally, a Mexican police cruiser had stopped them, the officer demanding to know what they were doing there in a U.S. military vehicle. Scully had politely requested to be taken to the nearest American embassy. Cassandra had been treated in a Mexican emergency medical care center while Mulder made the appropriate phone calls and Scully filled out the extensive paperwork. Upon arriving in Miami, Cassandra had been taken to St. Joseph's Memorial for observation and recovery. The young woman was so weary after her ordeal that she viewed the forced hospital stay as a relief instead of a burden. Mulder wondered if the archaeologist's daughter would recognize him, now that he had cleaned up and changed clothes. She had never seen him in his suit and tie FBI uniform. Cassandra Rubicon lay propped on the bed, surrounded by bleached white sheets, her head bandaged like a Civil War veteran's. "Feeling better?" he asked, coming to stand beside her bed. "Much," she said, "and your own appearance is much improved." "I have to ask you this, Cassandra," he said, growing more serious, "because everything we saw has been destroyed without a trace. Did your team happen to smuggle out any notes, any photographs, any hard evidence from the Xitaclan site?" She shook her head, then winced as a flicker of pain crossed her face. "No, there's nothing. My entire team died down there. My own father was murdered because of me, because of Xitaclan." She swallowed, then looked around at the television, the walls, anything but the discussion she was now having with Mulder. "It's all gone now, including our records. The only thing I have left is my memories, and even those aren't too clear." Mulder stood next to her, momentarily turned his attention to the blank television set, trying to find the right words to say. Cassandra seemed withdrawn, as if searching for an inner reservoir of strength. When she spoke, it surprised him. "There are still 1,000 unexcavated sites in the Yucatan, Mulder. Maybe when I get back on my feet, I'll put together a new expedition. Who knows what else we might find?" Mulder allowed himself a small smile. Who knows? I just hope I don't have to come rescue you next time. Scully's home, Annapolis, Maryland, Sunday, 1:07 p.m. Now that she had returned home, she had to get into the right frame of mind to work on her official report about Xitaclan, juggling the loose ends in her mind until she finally succeeded in tying them together. There were other cases, other investigations, other X-Files. She had to close this one and move on. In a few hours of peace and solitude in her own apartment, Scully could finish up the backlog of paperwork that had piled up during their trip to Mexico. It felt good to be back in civilization. Their specific assignment to search for the missing archaeology team members had been completed. Scully felt grateful to be able to mark an official case closed, technically at least. On the legal pad, she listed the names of the 4 murdered team members, adding details of how she had discovered their bodies submerged in the cenote, how she and Mulder had recovered them from the water. She concluded that all had been killed by members of the guerrilla organization Liberación Quintana Roo. She didn't know what to write under Cassandra Rubicon. She had been found alive and unharmed, though how, Scully did not understand. She still had no satisfactory explanation for the young woman's disappearance, the lost 2 weeks in her life. Had she been out wandering in the jungles or hiding down in the ruins of Xitaclan while the rest of her team members lay dead in the sacrificial well? Scully could not include Mulder's talk about buried spacecraft and suspended animation chambers. As a side note, she scribbled a sentence about how, in the wake of the Xitaclan disaster and the debacle of the U.S. military covert operation, the Mexican government had finally come in with a sufficient force to crack down on the guerrilla activities. As for the tactical nuclear weapon that had supposedly obliterated Xavier Salida's fortress, their investigations had uncovered no evidence of additional black market armaments, other diverted nuclear devices that had fallen into the hands of Central American criminals. A continued search, though, would have to be conducted by other federal agencies, such as the CIA or the State Department. Under Vladimir Rubicon, Scully summarized the scenario of how the old man had been killed, struck on the head by Fernando Victoria Aguilar, because the old archaeologist had threatened to broadcast his report and call in additional government-sanctioned help, all of which would have interfered with Aguilar's artifact thievery. Hesitating, she made a notation that their guide, Aguilar, Rubicon's murderer, had been killed by a wild animal in the jungle. The monstrous feathered serpents were the hardest part for Scully to explain. Their presence posed the greatest difficulties for her rational report. She did not know how to account for the creatures, but she had seen them with her own eyes. She could not ignore their existence. Earlier, Mulder had described his glimpses of the unearthly serpent creatures in the moonlight, and she had thought he had just been imagining things. But she herself had watched the towering, coiling beast with its long iridescent scales and curved fangs. Finally, steeling herself, Scully commented on the density of the Central American rainforests, how many thousands of new species were identified every year. She conjectured that it was not completely beyond the realm of possibility that a large reptilian carnivore, especially one with such apparent intelligence, could have remained heretofore undetected by scientific expeditions and zoological study teams. With the destruction of the Xitaclan site and the significant amounts of new volcanic activity there, Mulder had been unable to offer any corroborating evidence. His alien artifacts remained unconfirmed, his derelict spacecraft destroyed. She felt that while she would include his verbal eyewitness account, she could do nothing more than let it stand on its own. She would have to smooth everything out in her final report. Scully could say only that the many anomalies at Xitaclan remained unexplained. FBI Headquarters, Annapolis, Maryland, Sunday, 2:12 p.m. Though FBI headquarters never shut down entirely, the Sunday afternoon quiet surrounded Mulder with a warm peacefulness unlike the usual bustle of a normal business day. It was not a rare occurrence for him to come in on the weekend. Scully had often joked about his lack of a social life. Now he sat pensive, with the mini blinds drawn and a desk lamp switched on. Rubbing the bridge of his nose, he pushed aside his stack of books on Maya myths and archaeology. He studied a sheaf of satellite photos he had obtained through sensible use of 2 Washington Redskin tickets. He had invested in season passes, though his caseload rarely allowed him to go to the actual games. However, the tickets often proved to be a useful form of currency for getting unofficial favors done in the Bureau. He sat down and looked at the finely detailed photos, a few of them showing the devastated crater remaining where a Mexican drug lord's private villa had once been. Curious, he turned to another photo, studying the close-in target of the hellish, blasted landscape around the ruins of Xitaclan. The volcanic hotbed had already generated enormous excitement among geologists. That part of the Yucatan should have been geologically stable instead of giving birth to an erupting volcano, much like the mysterious appearance of Pileggi in 1948. The cone of the new volcano had already begun to take shape, and early geological reports suggested that the new eruption would continue for years. Mulder wondered if there could be any connection between Pileggi and Xitaclan, but dismissed the thought. He would have no chance to go back to the Yucatan. He had no reason to return, because the erupting lava and volcanic tremors would have annihilated all evidence, even down to the mundane archaeological ruins. Not a scrap of Xitaclan's ancient glory remained. Mulder picked up the precious jade artifact, the slick, smooth stone of whitish green carved into the design of a feathered serpent. This time the image struck him with an eerie chill, because he had seen the real thing. So many centuries of mystery lay locked in that place and in this artifact. But since Xitaclan had been destroyed, no one would believe his explanations, as usual. Mulder set the jade carving on his desk with a sigh. At least he could use it for a decent paperweight.
We hope you've enjoyed this program from Harper Audio. To order additional cassettes or to receive a complete catalog of Harper Audio and Cadman titles, please call us at 1-800-331-3761. That's 1-800-331-3761. Thank you.